Chapter 625. It would not be easy to fight against the god of the hunt, Malor. There were no allies in this world for no reason. With the water of life in his hands, Soren was more confident in asking the Princess Royal for help. But all of this still depended on his next plan. He had prepared a lot of things to deal with the god of the hunt, even including some things that he had to pay a price for. Before he really carried out the plan, Soren still had a very important thing to do, and that was to go to the Gobi Desert to meet some people. The attitude of these people was the key to all of Soren's next plans. If they were willing to help Soren, then Soren would not have to use the backup plan. But if they were not willing to help, then Soren could only rely on the backup plan to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. These people were the paladins. For a long time, Soren's attitude towards the paladins was very complicated. As a member of the Order faction, Soren was very appreciative of the paladins' behavior in maintaining order. But because good and evil were the opposite of each other, Soren had a fierce contradiction with the paladins in the way of doing things and the way of doing things. For a long time, Soren had always avoided any obvious conflict with the paladins, and even helped them several times. For example, he told them where the core material of the Holy Avenger was. And when he fought against the demigod vampire, although Soren's purpose was to get rid of a dangerous enemy once and for all, it was undeniable that he also saved the lives of the paladins. This time, Soren went to the Gobi Desert to meet them. From here, through the elven forest, he could quickly reach their place of cultivation by following the trade route of the east. Soren needed to meet them and test the paladins' attitude towards him, and then consider a small request. This small request was to borrow the Holy Avenger. That's right. Soren wanted to use the power of the Holy Avenger to get rid of the god of the hunt, Malor. As one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane, the Holy Avenger completely crushed all of Soren's equipment in all aspects. However, this weapon was not something he could possess. If anyone who wasn't a paladin took possession of this weapon, they would attract endless trouble. Soren could use the Holy Avenger. Even though the process was a little painful and the damage to his mind was severe, it was undeniable that Soren could use the Holy Avenger to last through the entire battle with omnipotent hands. When fighting against the demigod vampire, this most powerful weapon in the material plane had already proved its power. Therefore, when Soren decided to deal with Malor, the god of the hunt, he immediately thought of this weapon. If he could use the Holy Avenger in battle, Soren's chances of victory would increase by at least 20%. This weapon could be said to have a unique advantage against Malor, the god of the hunt from the chaotic evil faction. With its high damage output and Soren's explosive power, if he could get the help of other strong players, he might be able to achieve the same level of dominance as he did in the previous battle. With the Holy Avenger in hand, Soren's reservation plan could be reduced by half. He might not even have to try to provoke conflicts between the god of the hunt and other gods. He just needed to avoid being besieged by the followers of the Church of the Hunt and find an opportunity to kill the god of the hunt. However, Soren couldn't figure out the paladins' attitude towards him, and he wasn't sure if they were willing to lend him this most important holy object. Therefore, he secretly provoked a conflict between the Church of the Hunt and the Church of the Suffering in advance. Wind and sand filled the sky. Soren's figure appeared outside the Gobi Desert. Because the Avatar crisis was coming, the route to the Eastern Kingdom had become very dangerous. The terrible climate change had buried many passing merchants, so not many people passed through the Desert of Death for the time being. The secret base of the paladins couldn't be easily approached. If Soren encountered some idiot who cast a spell to detect his alignment, then things would be very awkward. Then do you still want to borrow the Holy Avenger? Don't attack? What if the other party was stubborn enough to attack Soren, this evil guy? So, the wisest choice was to first find someone Soren had met before, so as to avoid a direct conflict. The paladins also knew how to be polite. If there was such a person who had contact with Soren in advance, the other paladins should not cast a spell to detect his alignment. In terms of flexibility, these paladins who lived in seclusion near the Gobi Desert were much easier to get along with than those of the Church of Glory. Those paladins couldn't tolerate sand in their eyes. Who should he find? The ideal target was naturally the prison warden, who had a high status within the paladin organization. However, Soren wasn't familiar with him, so his first target should be the young paladin he saw in the City of Wealth. If he could get in touch with the Holy Avenger through him, and then find a way or even pay some price to borrow the weapon, then the next thing would be much easier. Find someone. This was a bit of a troublesome problem. However, the channel Soren could mobilize now was not what it used to be, and he soon learned the whereabouts of the paladins. Arendelle. Since they had obtained an important part of the Holy Avenger, The most important thing for the paladins now was naturally to repair this weapon. However, there were very few people in the entire material plane who could repair this weapon. One of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane, this was not a joke. Even the most skilled blacksmiths in the human kingdom couldn't repair the Holy Avenger even a little bit. Because this weapon was an artifact, there were remnants of great divine power on it. In other words, one must reach the level of being able to use divine power to repair this weapon. Looking at the entire material plane, there were very few people who could do this. Not only did they have to be able to use divine power, but they also had to be very skilled in magical weapons. There were only a few people who could do this. Arendelle's Princess Royal. There was no doubt that Princess Royal was very powerful as a divine warlock. At the same time, she was also the only person in the north who could easily use divine power. Secondly, Princess Royal was an advanced legendary spellcaster, so she had a very high understanding of alchemy and enchantment. The part found in the Underdark was Tyr's Eye. This thing was also an artifact-level material, and it wasn't something that could be casually embedded into it. The complicated process involved, as well as the price one had to pay, was enough to make anyone think twice before doing it. If he wanted to restore an incomplete artifact to its peak state, the amount of divine power needed to be consumed was enough to make Soren's teeth ache. So, unsurprisingly, the Paladin's progress in repairing the Holy Avenger did not have any progress, because Arendelle's Princess Royal was not willing to waste her precious divine power to help them. Therefore, the matter had been delayed until now. Chapter 626. The gentle evening breeze blew in his face. In the slums near the port of Arendelle, a group of half-grown children were gathered together. The sound of a sailor's horn came from the seaside, but the children didn't care at all. They gathered in a circle and focused on the front. From time to time, someone stood on the other side and imitated, posing a posture that was a bit like the sword form, horizontal slash. They were secretly learning combat skills. For these children who lived at the bottom, they didn't have much ambition. Their parents encouraged them to come here more in the hope that they could secretly learn something so that they wouldn't be bullied when they worked at the docks in the future. It was always good to know a few moves. On the other side of the slums was a cheap hotel with a shed for mules and horses on the side. The air was a little muddy, and the road outside was not muddy because of the prosperity of Arendelle, but it was inevitable that water would accumulate when it rained. This was the poorest area of Arendelle, but the people living here were not sallow and emaciated. At most they were dressed shabbily. The paladins lived here for the time being. As representatives of the lawful good camp, many of them refused to enjoy life and firmly believed in their own dogma. Therefore, the paladins refused the accommodations arranged by the court of Arendelle and chose a cheap hotel, because although they held great power, they were not a wealthy group. A young paladin was teaching a half-grown child. There were other paladins watching nearby. His name was no longer important. Since leaving the City of Wealth, his beliefs had been tempered too much. Now he was the user of the Holy Avenger. The paladins called him the Hand of Justice. Although he hadn't fully entered the realm of legends and had his own title, he was now very close to this step. In a very short period of time, he relied on his faith and will to surpass many of his companions. The warden also lived in this somewhat shabby little hotel. In the face of the fearful expression of the innkeeper, his dignified face always showed a smile as much as possible. Pity, tolerance, integrity. The paladins had a completely different attitude towards the noble class and the commoners. This attitude was just the opposite of other people. Ordinary people flattered the nobles when they came in contact with them and despised the lower class. Paladins, on the other hand, were the complete opposite. They treated the nobles harshly, but treated the commoners kindly and peacefully. From the perspective of the paladins, most of the nobles were evil, and their rule often made life difficult for ordinary people. All right. Let them practice on their own. Accompany me to Arendelle's palace later. We must see the Princess Royal again. The warden nodded slightly to the young paladin. He had witnessed the growth of this young man and watched him find his own path. The young paladin did not fall into a paranoid fanaticism. He firmly believed in justice and had his own understanding, so he finally chose justice, because he believed that justice could make the world better. The training stopped. The young paladin reached out and patted the apprentice's head. He smiled and said a few words, then turned and entered the inn. When he was trained as a saint samurai, he was also a child of this age. Now, so many years had passed in the blink of an eye, and he had touched the door of the legendary realm. Although he had made a vow not to marry and have children, He could not help but feel a trace of fatherly feeling towards this disciple. He was still very young. But his experience had made his face full of vicissitudes, and more of a settled perseverance. He began to understand the older paladins. A group of paladins walked towards the palace. From time to time people saw them on the road. Ordinary people nodded slightly, merchants looked a little surprised, and even people who wandered in the gray area saw them. At most they were a little worried and scared and then hid. This was not the city of wealth. This was the richest and most prosperous country in the north of the continent. This was Arendelle, ruled by the Princess Royal. Arendelle also had its gray area. But the commoners here would not choose to ask for help from the paladins, because although their lives were poor, it was not to the point of being unbearable. More often than not, they chose to believe in the laws of Arendelle. The rule of the Princess Royal maintained the clarity of the laws of Arendelle, and there were naturally laws to punish those who were too evil. Ordinary people hardly needed the help of the paladins, and they knew that the price of such help was too heavy. A city. A country. To judge the extent of their civilization, the simplest point was to see if they could accommodate the existence of the paladins. The city of wealth could not do it. But Arendelle did it. Another place that could do this was called Mordor. Although the residents often observed them with indifferent eyes, they still tolerated the appearance of the paladins. The law. The most similar thing between Mordor and Arendelle was that they both had strict laws. The commoners of Arendelle maintained respect for the paladins, and the nobles maintained politeness to the paladins. The former did not regard them as a light of hope, and the latter did not regard them as a threat to themselves. Because under the rule of the Princess Royal, the nobles strictly fulfilled their rights and obligations. They did not think that the paladins needed to judge them. They were just doing what the nobles should do, so they were not afraid of the paladins in their hearts, and naturally there was not so much hostility. Outside the palace, there was no doubt that the warden returned without success again. The Princess Royal had an absolutely noble status in Arendelle. If she did not want to see these paladins, then they could not see her anyway. The warden did not want to give up so easily. He knew that his request was a bit excessive and may cause the Princess Royal's power to be seriously damaged, but he also knew that the Princess Royal was one of the few people in the material plane who could repair the Holy Avenger, so he would never give up easily. Continuous refusal. This made the other younger paladins a little dissatisfied. They believed that repairing the Holy Avenger was a righteous and sacred thing, and the Princess Royal should never refuse such a thing. If it weren't for the prosperity and peace of Arendelle, they would have thought that the Princess Royal did not understand what a righteous cause was. The paladins easily fell into paranoia. Especially when justice filled their minds, fanaticism would cause many things to be seen as unjust. The warden needed to guide them and guide the way for these young people. The Princess Royal was willing to help them repair the Holy Avenger, which was a favor, and not willing to help them repair the Holy Avenger, which was a duty. You should not use morality to kidnap others, otherwise, you would also be kidnapped by morality. The paladins needed guidance. They were not a bunch of stubborn people from the Church of the Lord of Light, and the warden had always sneered at their education methods. The young paladins always relied on their passion to join their ranks, but only after experiencing various setbacks could they grow into real paladins. He had already guided a hand of justice, and the warden hoped that there would be more young people like this in the future. Because he felt the aura of the coming turmoil. Outside the palace, a carriage team gradually approached, and then a tall and handsome man with blonde hair appeared. He was the second prince of the Falcon Kingdom, and recently he wanted to go to the palace of Arendelle whenever he had nothing to do. The warden had seen him 3 times at the gate because he had always wanted to visit the Princess Royal. As before, the second prince of the Falcon Kingdom looked a little surprised and uneasy when he saw them, and then pretended to pass by from the side as if nothing had happened. This guy did not even dare to pass by in front of the warden. There was no doubt that he was not confident when facing the paladins. Once again they returned without success. The warden could not help but feel a little tired. The Princess Royal had almost nothing to ask of the paladins, and naturally the paladins could not provide anything in return. Power? With the strength of the Princess Royal, there were almost no mortals in the material plane who could defeat her. Well, not to mention whether the paladins had money or not, there were not many people in the entire material plane who could be richer than the Princess Royal. It was estimated that only the ruler of the city of Mordor could be comparable. There was no way to provide anything to the Princess Royal, and naturally the paladins could not ask for anything. Chapter 627. A thin figure shrouded in a gray cloak entered Arendelle. After all, Soren had crossed half of the continent. Even with the power of the gods, he was delayed for a day or two. Taking advantage of the night, he entered the city of Arendelle and was ready to see what the paladins were up to. For a long time, Soren's attitude towards the paladins was very complicated. It was not impossible for the two to cooperate, but the possibility was not very high. If there was a choice, Soren would certainly not want to have too much contact with the paladins, but now he had to try. Order evil and order good. In Soren's mind, the truest point was that order was more important than good and evil, and chaos was the real disaster. It was because of this point of view that he would repeatedly help the paladins. As an adventurer who had experienced the most turbulent period of the Avatar crisis and had died once, he had to go through the reincarnation of the Styx and then climbed all the way to the legendary realm. Soren was very clear that the most terrible thing about the Avatar crisis was not the gods fighting, but the complete destruction of the order and rules of many planes and worlds. When the order that had lasted for a long time inside the multiverse was destroyed, the terrible chaos would lead to crazy destructive power that was crazier than all the gods fighting. Soren was a person who advocated order. For him, good and evil were simply two sides of the world. If the devils were to rule the world, they would inevitably use iron and cruel means to control the world and enslave other races. But if the demons were to rule the world, then what would be left in the end would only be a broken ruin. The truest point of Soren's mind was that order was higher than good and evil. Whether it was order evil or order good, in the future after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, they might become his help and allies. The reason was simple. They needed to maintain order in that turbulent period, and only order, whether good or evil, could minimize the damage as much as possible. This was a bold attempt. For Soren, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis was imminent, and it was very necessary to make such a bold attempt. If he succeeded, he might be able to rope in more help in the future. Even if he failed, he would only lose a little time. Considering that he had once helped the Saint Samurai, these people probably wouldn't attack him yet. Chaos would destroy everything. Now, the death rate of the entire continent had increased significantly, and various races had begun to collide fiercely because of the collapse of order. He couldn't feel all of this in Mordor City, but Soren had already noticed it when he went to Amber City and Whiterun City. This kind of turmoil would sooner or later affect the South Coast. In the future, when the terrible era of chaos arrived, any power of order was worth contacting. Port District. It was quite easy to find a group of paladins in a city because they were too conspicuous. Soren only needed to ask a passerby to find out where they were. Under the light of dusk, a young Saint Samurai was teaching a disciple, and next to him were other Saint Samurai. They were wearing slightly mottled and worn armor, and they looked completely different from the Saint Samurai in silver and dazzling armor he saw in the City of Wealth. The latter looked more like the embodiment of light and justice, while the former was like a lonely guardian who had gone through the vicissitudes of life and could only try to maintain justice in the world. This was also an important reason why Soren was willing to get close to them. Holy Avenger. Pale Justice. These two most powerful artifacts in the material plane were weapons that only Saint Samurai could use. It just so happened that the sacred warrior organizations that were in charge of these two divine weapons had surprisingly maintained a peaceful heart. There was a trace of humility and reverence in their hearts, unlike the sacred warriors of the Church of the Lord of Glory, many of whom were unable to communicate with each other. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, when the young Saint Samurai saw Soren's figure, he was suddenly stunned. He still couldn't see Soren's face, but he remembered the cloak on Soren's body. Long time no see. Soren nodded slightly, and after seeing that the other party didn't have any hostility, he slowly said, "It seems that you've become stronger. I want to see the warden." Even the gods would maintain appropriate respect for high-grade legendary figures. This was true even for his followers. Even after death, such figures would still be valued in the kingdom of God. They would be the most solid foundation of the kingdom of God. Under normal circumstances, if a legendary figure who believed in them died, many times, they would send their own oracles to pick up the soul in person. If the other party's belief was pious enough and could attract the attention of the gods, then it was normal for the gods' incarnations to pick up the soul. "Your Excellency, please come with me." The young Saint Samurai might not be young anymore. After all, after so many experiences, his vicissitudes of life could no longer be concealed. He could probably guess Soren's camp. Because justice had become his belief, his perception of the outside world had become more and more obvious. In order to prevent the other Saint Samurai from doing something stupid like throwing a detection camp, he quickly bowed slightly to Soren to show his respect for the person in front of him, and then took him into the hotel. The Saint Samurai around were surprised. After all, the Hand of Justice was also a quasi-legendary figure. Only those who were legendary and above could make him bow to show his respect and call him Your Excellency. Soren seemed to be a rogue. It was well known. Rogues were rarely good people. Rogues like Robin Hood were only exceptions, so they were wise enough not to delve into it. Soren soon met the warden. This powerful legendary Saint Samurai, who had advanced into the legendary class, Judge, was also surprised by Soren's arrival. However, after all, the parts of the Holy Avenger were found through him, so the warden was just surprised and had no other emotions. For a legendary figure to come to him in person, there must be something very important, maybe even related to the Holy Avenger. This was just his personal intuition, because the warden told him where the important part of the Holy Avenger, Eye of Tyr, was. The warden quickly let the others go out, but he left the Hand of Justice here. Obviously he was ready to train him as his successor. I'm here for one thing. Soren looked at the two Saint Samurai in front of him and felt a little pressure in his heart. It was not because of the difference in strength, but because of the identity of the two Saint Samurai. He thought for a moment and was ready to tell the truth, but he had to hide something. So, he went straight to the point and said, I'm going to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. Don't ask me why I want to deal with him. He's my enemy and I want to kill him. It's that simple. This was the first sentence and it seemed a little too imposing. The first sentence was to deal with a god, which directly shocked the two in front of him. He thought for a moment. Soren found that he had not yet revealed his identity, so he took off his hood and said the second sentence, I'm Soren. I'm Soren. Just this sentence alone was enough. The legendary rogue who was known by everyone in the material plane, the powerful pirate king who ruled the three seas, built the prosperous city of Mordor single-handedly, and had a high status on the south coast. He was the idol of the rogues and now he had become the faith of many rogues. The reason was simple. He became a god. There were only 4 words in the last paragraph, but the weight of these 4 words seemed to be a bit heavy. Just the sentence, I'm Soren, had already stunned the two Saint Samurai in front of him. They were both legendary figures or close to legendary figures. But there was no doubt that the real legendary figure in the material plane in recent years, the legend of the legends, was undoubtedly Soren, who rose rapidly in Mordor and successfully became a god with the clergy of half-elf and rogue. The body of a god. At this moment, the two Saint Samurai were a little confused. They had no time to think about whether Soren was in the evil camp, because they were now full of one thought, that a god had appeared in front of them in person. My god. I actually saw the body of a god. Chapter 628. Under the dim moonlight. Soren's figure left the inconspicuous hotel. At the moment, it was very quiet outside, and only the barking of dogs could be heard occasionally. He made an agreement with the warden. Although he couldn't understand why Soren could use the Holy Avenger, in order to completely restore the power of this artifact, he decided to make a deal with Soren. The warden was not one of those inflexible paladins. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, he quickly became one of the leaders of the paladin organization, the Holy Avenger. As a figure who could rise at such a time as the Avatar crisis, the warden must have something different from other paladins. This could be seen from the other paladins trained by him. These paladins were obviously more rational and calm. The brilliance of the moon was getting dimmer. Just after the goddess of magic fell to the mortal world, today's moon suddenly became a little dim. It looked as if it was gray and covered with a shadow. Soren was not sure whether the Lady of Silvermoon had fallen from the sky, but this lady was the core key to the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. She was one of the oldest goddesses and used to be one of the most powerful goddesses. The Lady of Night and the Lady of Silvermoon. One was an evil god with great divine power, and the other was a good god with great divine power. These two goddesses were like the twins of fate, fighting for countless years. The Lady of Night had always wanted to completely defeat the Lady of Silvermoon, and the Lady of Silvermoon also wanted to defeat the Lady of Night. Their struggle could no longer be counted. The great divine power of the goddess of magic came from the battle of these two goddesses. In the most ancient times, the battle of the two goddesses led to the chaos of mysterious energy, and thus the birth of the first generation of the goddess of magic. They were older than Mother Earth because they were the embodiment of the original light and darkness. A lot had happened during this period. For some reason, the Lady of Silvermoon's power declined greatly. At her worst, she was only at the level of minor divine power. However, she was, after all, an ancient and powerful god. Under the protection of the goddess of magic, the Lady of Silver Moon quickly retrieved a part of her power and restored it to the level of lesser divine power. Then, for hundreds of years, she successively intervened in the fields of pregnancy, breastfeeding, motherhood, and so on. Finally, she successfully restored the power of intermediate divine power. The Lady of Silver Moon no longer needed the protection of the goddess of magic, but with the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the two goddesses once again collided violently. This must be mentioned because according to Soren's memory, Lillian, the Witch of Dread, died in the hands of the Silver Moon Lady. She was the most ancient deity. It was impossible to calculate the time of its birth. Many legends were too old and it was hard to say whether they were true or not. One thing that Soren could be sure of was that the power of the Lady of Silver Moon would change with the elemental tide. Sometimes the power was very weak and sometimes it was very strong. The goddess of magic was created by the battle between her and the Lady of Night. The battle between the two goddesses produced a mysterious explosion. The Lady of Silver Moon gave up part of her power for the sake of more positive energy, which led to the emergence of the first generation of mages and obtained part of their power. Therefore, the relationship between the goddess of magic and the Lady of Silver Moon had always been very close. This goddess maintained a good relationship with many gods. When she was at her weakest, she once sought the protection of the goddess of love and beauty. She also had a good relationship with the goddess of joy. Now, the representative of the Light Camp, the Lord of Light, had always been her staunch ally. She also had an ally, the Dark Maiden. That was the goddess whose holy emblem was a naked drow girl in the moonlight. She had long fallen in the hands of her mother, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth. This goddess also had a close relationship with the Lady of Silver Moon, so the Lady of Silver Moon and the Queen of Spiders also maintained a hostile camp. However, the biggest enemy of the Lady of Silver Moon was still the Lady of Night. She was Lady of the Night, Goddess of the Lost, Goddess of Darkness, and so on. This ancient Lady of the Night was a goddess who liked secrets. She was only intermediate divine power, at her weakest, but because of the last turbulent period she plotted to kill the god of caves in the Underdark and accepted the believers of this god. Then the Lady of Night created the Shadow Weave. Through a series of alliances and secret confrontations with the Queen of Spiders, the Lady of Night and the Queen of Spiders entered the realm of greater divine power at the same time. If there was anyone other than the Queen of Spiders that Soren was afraid of, there was no doubt that the Lady of Night was one of them. This ancient goddess was also very powerful. As mentioned earlier, the cat and dance goddess almost fell into the deepest depths of lust, which led to a serious deviation in her camp. This was the work of the Lady of Night. The Lady of Night rarely appeared in the material plane. Most of the time she would only appear in those dark dances, communion meetings, and grand dark ceremonies full of tempting lust and lust. The fall of the first generation of the God of Thieves led to the fall of the Shadow Divinity. Although the Mistress of the Night maintained an alliance with the Lord of Shadows on the surface, she was still secretly plotting to kill the Lord of Shadows and reclaim the priesthood of the Shadow Domain. The Avatar crisis broke out. The fall of the Goddess of Magic led to the return of powerful forces. Before the birth of a new Goddess of Magic, the two forces that directly led to the birth of the Goddess of Magic gradually returned to the Lady of Silver Moon and the Lady of Night. So, these two goddesses gradually recovered the great power of the ancient times, and because of the conflict between them, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis became more intense. Everything happened for a reason. Soren had been in this world for so long, and he had thought more than once about whether he could stop the terrible destruction of the Avatar crisis. But when he gradually figured it out, he found that nothing could be stopped in front of the torrent that swept across the multiverse. His weakest personal strength could not change the general trend of the time of troubles. This was not caused by a single factor. Many reasons were concentrated at this moment, and then because of this moment they collectively broke out. These reasons would not break out and they would continue to exist. The outbreak was just because the energy storm ignited everything, providing an opportunity for all the grievances to be resolved. The light dimmed. Suddenly, the silver moon in the sky seemed to have lost its brilliance. Night enveloped the whole world and the sleeping people did not feel anything. But Soren suddenly stopped. He felt that the moonlight in the sky had lost its spirituality, like a gaze that had been watching the world for a long time, and suddenly disappeared without a trace. The Lady of Silver Moon fell. Although it seemed that there was no abnormality, Soren was very sure that the Lady of Silver Moon had fallen to the mortal world. After the Goddess of Magic fell to the mortal world, the second core figure of the Avatar crisis also fell to the mortal world. Soren stood in place for a long time. To be honest, he did not know much about the Lady of Silver Moon, and he did not pay much attention to her at the beginning, mainly because Soren liked to be active in the Underdark and did not know the specific situation of the gods in the surface world. On the contrary, for the gods in the Underdark, especially the old rival of the Lady of Silver Moon, the Lady of the Night, Soren remembered very clearly, if he remembered correctly. The basic profession levels of the Lady of the Night were Rogue 10, Shadow Dancer 10, Assassin 10, Warlock 10, Shadow Lord 10. Health points, 968. There were also believers of the Lady of the Night, in the Underdark. As a god of the same level as the Queen of Spiders, it was difficult for Soren not to remember her information. Moreover, the Lady of the Night also controlled the Shadow Weave, so most people who had been in the underground world would remember her. It was very interesting. This goddess was also an advanced Shadow Dancer, but she had also advanced to Shadow Lord, and her strength was still too terrifying compared to Soren. Chapter 629. The bright white moonlight gradually recovered. However, the light seemed a little hollow. Soren suddenly felt a very powerful vibration from somewhere in Arendelle. This attracted his attention. His figure landed on the roof with a light leap, and then he quickly approached the front. As the distance gradually narrowed, Soren found that the place where the vibration of the divine power came from was actually the palace of Arendelle. On the observatory on the side of the palace, there was a very powerful burst of power. Is it Princess Royal? Soren couldn't help but have a little doubt in his heart, and directly rushed over with Fly. No matter what, Princess Royal was still in an alliance with him. Something must have happened to such a vibration of divine power. Haha. There was a strange chuckle. As soon as Soren approached the palace of Arendelle, Princess Royal found his trace. An incarnation made of ice and snow appeared. She glanced at Soren faintly and said with a little surprise, "It's you?" There was another person present. The royal palace of Arendelle had been set up with powerful security magic by the elder princess. After all, her enemies were not ordinary. The chosen of the Maiden of Pain. Soren recognized the drow priestess with a coquettish face and a long whip at a glance. The other party's identity was too easy to recognize. Only the chosen of the three gods would use that kind of strange whip. One was the priestess of the Queen of Spiders, one was the admirer of the Queen of Succubus, and the last was the chosen of the Maiden of Pain. Princess Royal had always had a hostile relationship with Winter Maiden, and Maiden of Pain happened to have a close relationship with Winter Maiden. That was how the previous dispute had arisen. "You dare to come here." Princess Royal's expression was as cold as frost. She stared at the drow priestess in front of her with murderous eyes. With a wave of her hand, ice and snow filled the surroundings. Ice prison. A crisp laughter sounded, and the priestess of the Maiden of Pain disappeared in place, and then appeared 100 meters away. She glanced at Soren with some fear and then said playfully, "It seems that a lot of things have happened to you during this time. I just came here to tell you that Winter Maiden has returned from the astral plane. It won't be long before she comes to see you." "Ah. I won't stay here and disturb you. I'll go first." With a magic aura, the priestess of the Maiden of Pain disappeared. She was afraid of Princess Royal, otherwise she wouldn't run away. Winter Maiden? The Princess Royal couldn't help but frown slightly. She thought of the god that she had exiled to the astral plane. Why did the chosen of the Maiden tell her this? Didn't she maintain an alliance with Winter Maiden? These two evil gods once served the Storm Lord, the powerful god believed in the Amazon region. Later, because the Storm Lord stole the divine power of Winter Maiden, it directly led to the breakdown of this fragile divine relationship. The gods under the Storm Lord began to be disloyal, and Winter Maiden and the Maiden of Pain also formed an alliance. Winter Maiden, Maiden of Pain, God of the Hunt, Sea Goddess and Storm Lord. These 5 gods once belonged to the same divine system. The first 4 gods, whose strength ranged from minor divine power to intermediate divine power, all served the Storm Lord for a period of time. Their alliance was interesting. On the one hand, they maintained cooperation, and on the other hand, they schemed against each other. The evil camp liked this. The Maiden of Pain used to be a member of the Dark Gods, and served the former god of Massacre with the Lady of Poison. That was the bloodline source of the Son of Massacre. But since the death of the god of Massacre in the last turbulent year, these 2 goddesses gradually surrendered to the power of the Lady of the Night. However, after the return of the god of Tyranny, the Maiden of Pain's loyalty to the Lady of the Night began to waver. What happened next was very interesting. The god of Tyranny, fell during the Arcane Empire and was replaced by the Dread Lord, the bloodline source of the Son of Fear. The Maiden of Pain's master changed again and became the god of the Storm Lord. The Storm Lord seized the power of Winter Maiden, and the entire divine system collapsed again. The Sea Goddess rose to become a great divine power. The Maiden of Pain, Winter Maiden, and the god of the hunt formed an alliance, and then the situation continued until now. The relationship between the gods had always been like this. The position of the gods of the evil camp was almost only related to interests. Soren's mind instantly went through the things in his memory. The next moment, he realized one thing in his heart, that was, the Frost Chaos was about to break out. The Avatar Crisis. When this unprecedented period of turmoil broke out, the chaos was not just in one or two places. When Soren came to the Frost Kingdom through the Icewind Valley, he remembered that the Frost Chaos was about to break out, so he decided to go to the Outer Islands. Now Winter Maiden had returned. The Maiden of Pain's Chosen had also appeared in Arendelle. All the signs indicated that the Frost Chaos was likely to be brewing. Winter Maiden, Maiden of Pain, the god of the hunt. For a moment, all the clues in Soren's mind suddenly connected together. He realized something in an instant. That was, if he could kill the god of the hunt and then disintegrate the conspiracy of Winter Maiden and Maiden of Pain, then would the Frost Chaos not break out? If the Frost Chaos did not break out, then the Northern Kingdom centered on Arendelle would not fall into war. In history, this was also a heavily affected area of the Avatar Crisis. If the Princess Royal did not mysteriously disappear, the trajectory of history would be deviated. The turmoil of the Avatar Crisis would be reduced by Soren to some extent. For the first time. This was the first time that Soren felt that he could change the future. Although he could not interfere with the trajectory of the gods above the intermediate divine power, if he could destroy the allies of these weak gods, then the trajectory of the Avatar Crisis would have been deviated. What are you doing here? Princess Royal looked at Soren with a complicated expression. On the one hand, she was very reluctant to Soren's close relationship with Princess Anna. On the other hand, she had to admit that Soren's growth was too amazing. At the beginning he was just an ordinary adventurer. But now he had become a god with the help of the half-elf and the rogue clergy. Although the Princess Royal still had the advantage in terms of strength, Soren's status as a true god was far higher than hers. If it wasn't for the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis, with the ability of Soren as a true god, he would be far more powerful than Princess Royal after switching to the form of a god. No one knew why. Soren had always felt that Princess Royal gave him a lot of pressure, so he looked at her and said slowly, "I have prepared a gift for you. I also have something to discuss with you." Icewind Valley North. As dawn approached, a part of the forest in the south suddenly began to wither, like a plant plague. The roots of the trees rotted away, yellow leaves fell, and the green flowers and plants all withered. In just a short while, the entire forest had died, and the smell of decay permeated the air of the forest. Chapter 630. Withering was spreading like a disease. In the blink of an eye, the forest to the north of Icewind Valley had completely lost its vitality. Along with the light of a spell, a teleportation gate appeared near the Lizardman's swamp. This was a temporary portal. When the portal across space gradually stabilized, figures wearing gray robes appeared one by one. Among these people there were humans, lizard men, and even elves, as well as some creatures made of twisted roots. Their professions were also very different. The one at the front was an elf droll, but unlike the other droll, this droll was full of a rotten aura. Withered. Droll's most corrupt profession, an evil person who spread diseases and withers in nature. Standing in the second position was a human assassin. He had a pale face, and the dagger at his waist glowed with a black luster. At a glance, one could tell that it was smeared with terrible poison. The rotten aura spread. From the withered forest in front of them, an old woman with a haggard face walked out. Her face was covered with all kinds of religious tattoos. The soil she walked on also seemed to be infected with the disease, and there was a strange dark green color. She was the Lady of Poison, Lady of Plague, Goddess of Poison and Disease. Because of some reasons in her clergy, she was trapped in a body that used to be very beautiful but was now ravaged by disease and aging. She was a chaotic and evil god. Her greatest pleasure was to spread diseases and plagues, making people fear her name. Her believers included the fallen droll, assassins, and doctors. "My lord." A group of believers knelt down. The Lady of Poison's old face looked at them coldly, then turned her gaze to the north and said slowly, "Let's leave here first." I have a premonition that something annoying is approaching. The group quickly left. Not long after they left, an eagle's loud cry sounded. It swooped down from the sky, and the moment it landed, it turned into a drool covered in feathers. Poison, disease, plague. This is a disaster of nature. We must report to the Earth Walker immediately. The drool turned into an eagle again and flew away. Not long after he left, a tall female elf quickly approached. After she took a look, her face turned pale and hurried to the elf forest. On this day, near the gathering place of races in this area, whether it was humans, elves, or gnolls on the other side of the mountain, people suddenly began to fall ill. The disease was not very serious, but the speed of infection was very fast. Nearly a third of the people in the nearby villages were infected, and nearly half of them had a fever. The doctors were helpless and could only ask the priests of the temple for help. Withered forest. A muddy river flowed from it. Beside the river were many animal corpses. The rotting roots were like ghosts in the shadows. The corpses of these animals had been piled up. There were not many living creatures in the entire forest. Arendelle Royal Palace. When Soren took out the gifts he had prepared for the elder princess and Princess Anna, even the elder princess, who had always been calm, couldn't help but be surprised at the moment. She looked at the clear liquid in front of her and murmured, "Water of life? Fountain of youth?" Legendary spellcasters were very knowledgeable. Princess Royal recognized what it was at a glance, which was why she was so surprised. "Yes." Soren nodded slightly and said slowly, "One is for Anna and the other is for you." Princess Royal's expression was slightly stunned, and then she said slowly, "You're very thoughtful. That's rare." She showed a faint smile to Soren, and it seemed that the initial rejection had lessened a lot. As a powerful warlock, Princess Royal's need for the life water was naturally not that high. But for Princess Anna, who did not have her talent, the life water's effect was quite amazing. Princess Anna could use its power to stay young, and at the same time have a lifespan far beyond that of an elf. "Soren?" Princess Anna, wearing pure white pajamas, appeared in the hall. She trotted to Soren and threw herself into Soren's arms without hesitation. She hung her whole body on Soren's body. Princess Anna's expression at the moment had a hint of joy and a hint of bitterness. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but then she heard a suppressed cough from the side. Then she jumped down from Soren's body like a frightened rabbit and stood obediently behind Princess Royal. Princess Royal's expression suddenly became a little cold again. She looked at Soren as if he had stolen something important from her. Although she was not hostile, she was not very friendly either. She glanced at Princess Anna next to her and said seriously, "I have something very important to discuss with Sir Soren. Go back to your room and sleep first." After hesitating for a moment, Princess Royal handed the life water in her hand to Princess Anna next to her and said softly, "This is his gift to you. The legendary Fountain of Youth." Fountain of Youth? Princess Anna looked at it in surprise. When she looked up at Soren, her eyes were full of tenderness. No woman could resist the temptation of youth. Not to mention that this was given to her by Soren. Even an idiot should know how rare this thing was. Her biggest worry had always been that she was just an ordinary person who would gradually grow old with time, but now her biggest worry had disappeared. If Princess Royal was not here, the girl even wanted to throw herself into Soren's arms and give him a kiss at this moment. But in fact, this was simply impossible because Princess Royal would be very angry, and because it would not be very harmonious. Princess Anna reluctantly left. In her heart, she was still afraid that her sister would be angry. Princess Royal's majesty was not to be offended. In Arendelle, Princess Royal had an absolutely noble status, and in Princess Anna's heart, Princess Royal was also like a sister and a mother. So at this moment, even if she was very reluctant, she still went back obediently. But she had made up her mind to let her personal maid watch outside. When her sister and Soren finished talking about important things, she would immediately sneak out. There were policies and countermeasures, she would not be so obedient. Chapter 631. The light of dawn shone on Arendelle. Princess Royal's figure appeared on the astrology platform. At this moment she was wearing a simple blue dress. She looked like an ordinary girl. She didn't have the aura of a superior, but there was a hint of feminine beauty. At this moment her expression seemed a little tired, as if she hadn't slept all night. Now that autumn had arrived, the temperature should be relatively high, but for some reason the air around her was very cold. A layer of autumn frost seemed to have fallen on the astrology platform. This shouldn't have happened. because everything in front of him meant that Princess Royal's power was a little out of control, and it seemed to have changed the surrounding environment a little bit. She once created an ice fortress out of thin air. With such great magic control skills, it was absolutely impossible for her to be so chaotic that even her own energy overflowed and affected the surrounding air. The power of a god. Princess Royal stood on the astrology platform and looked down at Arundel in front of her. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. She murmured, "What an elusive power." Since the last time she mysteriously disappeared for a while, her power had become more and more powerful. Sometimes, when Princess Anna faced her, she felt as if she was facing a god. But since then, Princess Anna also felt that there was something wrong with her sister. She liked to be alone more and more. Most of the time, she stayed alone on the astrology platform and didn't allow anyone to disturb her. Princess Royal was a little upset at the moment. Not only because of Soren's matter, but also because of her own troubles. During the time when she mysteriously disappeared, she went to another plane. There was a well-planned conspiracy against her. Although she successfully cracked the other party's trick and gained great power, there was another problem. That was, she was still just a mortal. A divine sorcerer could have powerful divine power, but she didn't have any divinity. Even her divinity was only inherited from her bloodline. Princess Royal couldn't absorb divinity and divinity like Soren. The excessive divine power caused her to gradually lose control of her own power. If I had to use a metaphor, the current Princess Royal was like the Witch of Terror Lillian at her peak. Relying on her powerful will, she could still control herself and not be affected by the power. But when it came to controlling the divine power, it was no longer as easy as it used to be. Besides, if the energy was too abundant, it would cause the divine power to overflow. That was why a layer of frost unnaturally condensed around her. Ascension to godhood was imminent. Princess Royal felt that her power was on the verge of going out of control. This was a huge power that mortals could not control. Only by using the template of a deity could she truly control this power. But ascending to godhood was definitely not an easy task. First of all, Princess Royal's divinity might not be enough. Secondly, she had almost no power of divinity. Then, she had not condensed a clergy suitable for herself. As long as the Winter Maiden had not fallen, it would be difficult for her to easily condense a clergy related to ice and snow. The only thing she didn't have to worry about was her divine power points. For some reason, the divine power she had accumulated was even close to the level of a mid-grade divine power deity. The Paladins had always hoped that Princess Royal would help them repair the Holy Avenger. But in this case, how could the Princess Royal help them do such a troublesome thing? Repairing the artifact was an extremely delicate process. Now she could not even gather all her power at ordinary times. It would be even more difficult to repair the Holy Avenger. But these things could never be told to the Paladins, even to Soren. Princess Royal could only hide everything in her heart and silently look for a solution. She was very strong-willed. As the ruler of Arundel, she would never allow herself to show any weakness in front of others. Maybe it's time to fight her head-on. Princess Royal seemed to have made a decision in her heart. She looked into the distance and whispered, "Only the clergy of ice and snow can match my power. There must be a battle between me and the Winter Maiden. Soren. Maybe I can try to join forces with him. Because of Anna, he should be trustworthy." The Holy Avenger could not be repaired. But it could be considered to help Soren deal with the god of hunting. Soren did not know the power of the Holy Avenger because he was just a half-baked spellcaster. He did not know how much energy it would take to repair the most powerful artifact in the material plane. But Princess Royal was very clear about this. That was, if the Holy Avenger was completely repaired, she would fall into a long period of weakness. With the current chaotic situation on the continent, Arendel's peace was entirely dependent on her power to deter everyone. If the Princess Royal fell into a long period of weakness, the entire Frost Kingdom would be seriously affected. The Holy Avenger. This was one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane. It had not been repaired yet, but it already had such amazing power. If it was completely repaired, people in the good camp would be eager to get it, and people in the evil camp would be afraid and want to destroy it. In Princess Royal's view, Soren was still a little inconsiderate in this matter. If the Holy Avenger was completely repaired, it was estimated that all the organizations in the evil camp on the continent would feel their hearts skip a beat. Because of their fear of the power of the Holy Avenger, it was hard to say what they would do. This was the same reason why the Flail of Time was broken into parts again and again. This matter might even attract other gods. After all, the last part of the Holy Avenger was the Eye of Tyr. This part came from the previous, God of Justice, greater divine power. It was an eyeball that was dug out before he fell. The Holy Avenger in its complete form was a sixth-grade artifact. Even the artifacts in the hands of many gods were not as powerful as it. This thing was a hot potato. Princess Royal had been delaying the paladins because she believed that the Holy Avenger should not be repaired, especially since the attitude of the God of Light and the Church of Justice was still unclear. Ta-ta-ta. A series of hurried footsteps came from outside. Princess Royal immediately frowned because this was a place where she meditated alone. Unless it was a very important matter, no one was allowed to disturb her. Your Majesty. A young and beautiful female official ran up in a panic. She held a document in her hand and said incoherently, "Not good. Plague. A very serious plague has occurred in the south." Plague? Princess Royal's face suddenly turned ugly. She quickly took the document and glanced at it. Her expression immediately became quite solemn. There really was a plague outbreak. What was even more frightening was that the plague this time didn't just infect humans. Even trees and flowers would be infected by the plague. It was close to the autumn harvest season, but all the crops in the south of the Frost Kingdom had withered. This was definitely not a natural disaster. Chapter 632. The news soon reached Soren. Because the plague spread very quickly, not only did it spread to the Frost Kingdom, but it also raged on the edge of the human gathering place in the Elven Forest. This was definitely not a plague that appeared in nature because it was impossible for a natural plague to spread to humans and plants at the same time. Moreover, the speed of the plague this time was so fast that it made people wonder if there was someone secretly manipulating it behind the scenes. Has the Lady of Poison also fallen to the mortal world? Soren looked at the information in his hand and murmured, "Other than the Lady of Poison, there shouldn't be anyone who can spread the plague so quickly." The plague infected the crops. From the edge of the Elven Forest to the periphery of the Frost Kingdom, and then to the south of the Northern Tower, all of them were affected by this terrible plague. All the crops withered overnight. What was even more frightening was that if these infected crops were eaten by people, a new epidemic would soon break out. Many people who were not infected at first were infected because they ate infected animals and plants. The only thing to be thankful for was that although the plague this time was widespread, it did not cause too many casualties. The main reason was that during the infection period the infected people would at most have a fever, but they did not die immediately. This gave time for all parties to react. This world had divine spells, and the priests could quickly treat the plague by relying on the disease removal spell. The only problem was that many people were infected again after being treated. It should be the work of the goddess of pestilence. Soren could not help but think of the god of the hunt, Malor. When the gods first fell to the mortal world they lost most of their power. Therefore the god of the hunt, Malor, caused great turmoil in the south. The hunters constantly used bloody sacrificial rituals to please the god and restore his lost divine power at the same time. The Lady of Poison's behavior should be the same. She spread the plague to make the mortals fearful, because the faith generated by the fear could also restore her lost divine power. The plague was still under control. It was estimated that the Lady of Poison did not dare to offend too many forces at the same time. Otherwise, many churches would unite to deal with her. Arendelle Imperial Palace. At this moment, Princess Royal had regained her former majesty. In front of her was a group of Arendelle's court ministers. She glanced around and ordered in a deep voice, "Seal the passage to Icewind Valley immediately. Order the army to be stationed at Ice River City's Cold Wind Fortress. Before the plague crisis is resolved, no one is allowed to pass through. Mobilize the doctors and priests. Give the order to burn all the crops in the epidemic area. The Arendelle royal family will provide them with aid in the coming winter." Orders were issued one after another. Very soon Arendelle's army was mobilized and directly cut off the passage to Icewind Valley. Currently the plague was only wreaking havoc on the periphery. However, if it were to spread into the city, the disaster would be quite terrifying. Soren was also very cautious about this. He contacted the intelligence network on the south coast almost immediately and ordered everyone to be on their guard. They had to pay close attention to any possible followers of the goddess of pestilence. Now they could only hope that the goddess of pestilence knew when to stop. Otherwise they would have to gang up on her. Harvest City. Almost as soon as the plague appeared in the northern region, the Church of Agriculture was also operating rapidly. Speaking of the hatred between the goddess of pestilence and the goddess of agriculture, It all started from her mother, Mother Earth. This ancient deity had always hated the goddess of pestilence because she would spread terrible diseases in nature, destroying the beautiful natural environment until it was full of holes. After Mother Earth handed over her own priesthood to her daughter, who was now the goddess of agriculture, the goddess of agriculture also inherited the antagonistic relationship with the goddess of pestilence. The two churches had been in conflict for thousands of years, and it was basically a situation where they would fight whenever they met. At this moment, in a magnificent temple, a group of priests who believed in the goddess of agriculture had gathered together. At a glance, almost all of the priests here were bishops, and there were also many who had the strength of legendary. The goddess of agriculture's faith was very widespread. Her church had a rather large droll church. Here, and here. A middle-aged droll with a dignified face pointed at the map in front of him and said in a deep voice, "There are traces of the fallen of the Church of Pestilence's activities here. The goddess has sent an oracle to immediately stop the spread of the plague and at the same time, attack the enemy's strength. I'm afraid that this year's harvest has been affected. I hope that each parish can store food. If there is a famine, the church must immediately provide relief to the victims." Similar scenes were happening all over the place. Basically, the churches that were affected by the plague, whether good or evil, were full of hostility toward the goddess of pestilence. Although she had recovered a lot of power with the help of the plague, it was likely that she had gained a lot of hatred this time. Perhaps she didn't care at all. Because all along, the goddess of pestilence had been feared, hated, and revered by people. Even the gods were a little afraid of her. Because she had inherited a part of the power of the god of decay. The first generation of the goddess of fortune died because of the god of decay, and then the current twin of destiny was born. From then on, the god of decay began to fall to others, and finally, a part of it was inherited by the goddess of pestilence. This goddess, who was good at using poisons, had a large number of assassins as followers, and she had never been at a disadvantage in the mortal world. South of Autumnfall, a strong smell of blood permeated the woods, and many corpses could be seen on the ground. The hunters were harvesting the enemy's lives. "I believe that the Lord will be satisfied with the sacrifice we offer." A one-eyed gnoll showed a grim smile on the corner of his mouth, waving a dagger and cutting the throat of an elf captive in front of him. In front of them there was also an injured black cheetah. This fierce beast was now seriously injured and was easily captured by the hunters. Shadow leopard. A creature born with 25 points of dexterity in adulthood, they were the favorite companions of the elven rangers. "Maybe we should hunt a dragon." A strong ogre came to the side of the one-eyed gnoll. Its eyes had a different light of wisdom from other gnolls. Suddenly, it swung the mace in its hand and roared angrily, "Damn werewolf! That's the dinner I prepared. Don't touch that elf. I'm going to take it back for supper." Chaos had begun to spread. And the first to cause all this was the gods of the chaotic evil camp. Chapter 633. Under the cold moonlight. A primitive and wild altar stood in the vicinity of Spiky Ridge Valley. A species rarely seen in other parts of the main road lived here. Steel-haired boar people. The origin of this creature could no longer be explored. It was only known that outside the human kingdom, near the wilderness, many boar people like them lived on the edge of the orcs' territory. These races were basically the same as the gnolls. They lived a life of fishing and hunting, so hunting was an essential part of their daily lives. The belief of Malor, the god of the hunt, was widely spread in this area. It was close to the early hours of the morning. A large number of bonfires were erected near the altar in front of them. The howling of wild boars could be heard faintly, as well as other chaotic sounds. Many evil war-creatures were firm believers of Malor, the god of the hunt. At this moment, a large number of species gathered near the altar. There were humans, orcs, lizardmen, gnolls, and boar people. Many creatures were divided into their own camps near the altar. Because of the racial gap, the relationship between these hunters was not very harmonious even if they believed in the same god. In other words, they rarely gathered together unless it was an important mission. A whoa! A mournful wolf howl was heard. The gnolls near the altar could not help but look surprised, and some even shrank back in fear. Under the cold moonlight, a tall and burly figure was approaching quickly. It had an appearance similar to a gnoll, but if one looked closely, it was not a gnoll at all. It was a dark creature. It was a werewolf. As a dark species like vampires, the werewolf had talent far beyond ordinary creatures. It looked at the other hunters with scarlet eyes, then slowly walked to the center of the altar. Dark species relied on hunting to survive. Whether it was werewolves or vampires, there was a considerable number of people who believed in Mailer, the god of the hunt. The reason was simple. It was not only because of the priesthood that the god of the hunt held, but more importantly, he also had a very special domain. The moon domain. As a chaotic and evil god, the god of the hunt could survive for so long. Naturally, he was not easy to deal with. The Lady of Silver Moon was very weak for a period of time. She even had to rely on the protection of the god of love and beauty and the power of the goddess of magic to survive. It was during this period of time that the god of the hunt used a long time to expand his domain and increase the scope of his believers. He used a long time to expand his domain and he mastered the moon domain. It was because of this. Many dark species had become his believers, especially the werewolves. Many of the dark species believed in him. It was well known. Ever since the god of the hunt, Mailer, had mastered the moon domain, the were-creatures had been divided into two factions. One faction maintained their faith in the Silver Moon Lady, while the other shifted to the embrace of the god of the hunt. They believed that the teachings of the god of the hunt were more suitable for the nature of the creatures of the dark world. The sacrifice. The burly werewolf stood at the center of the altar, looking down at the other species as if declaring his unique status. This was a legendary species. Compared to the vampires who liked to mix with humans, many were-creatures loved the wild life. They liked to wander in the wilderness and many of them lived near the territory of the orcs. A dull roar sounded. A high-grade cheetah was carried up, followed by a dragon with its limbs locked, and then a burly orc warrior. One by one the prey was sent to the altar. Almost all of them were high-grade creatures. At this moment they were the prey offered to the god of the hunt. The power of bloody lust would awaken the god of the hunt. Why is there no legendary blood? The were-creature glanced at the prey, frowned and said in a deep voice, "Are you prepared to offer this trash to my lord?" The god of the hunt loved legendary blood. Even if there were many high-grade creatures in front of him, the were-creature thought that it would be better to offer a legendary creature to win the favor of the god of the hunt. The sacrifice was in progress. Accompanied by the strong smell of blood, the prey were killed one by one. The strong smell of blood gathered on the altar and finally turned into the shadow of a creature with sharp fangs and claws. This was the body of the god of the hunt. One of them looked like a combination of a gorilla and a baboon. Its head was similar to a gnoll's, and its face was blood-red with a ferocious expression. Its ears were shaped like daggers and its body was covered in thick hair. Its four limbs were sturdy and powerful, and there were traces of a tail behind it. The king of beasts. The beast of black blood. The body of the god of the hunt was a beast with high intelligence. It stared at the prey on the altar, and a trace of anger and dissatisfaction appeared in the eyes of the condensed shadow. With a roar, the gnoll who was in the middle of the sacrifice suddenly died on the spot. Whoosh! A large number of hunters knelt on the ground. They prayed with fear and awe, praying that the god of the hunt would not be angry with them. The god of the hunt was very dissatisfied. The burly were-creature seemed to have expected this. Without the legendary blood to offer to the master, such high-grade creatures would be useless no matter how many of them there were. Pray. The shadow of the god of the hunt roared angrily. Suddenly, it turned its eyes to the hillside in the distance and roared, "The prey is there. Catch her. Give her to me. I want her blood." There were enemies nearby. The burly were-creature realized this in an instant. He knelt on one knee toward the distorted shadow of the beast in front of him and said in a deep voice, "My master, Lord Hog Nakma has brought the prey to you." Whoa! With a howl, a few were-creature figures suddenly rushed out of the darkness. The burly were-creature leader leaped over a distance of more than 10 meters and rushed toward the hillside in front. At this time, the other hunters came to their senses and rushed toward the hillside one by one. Under the cold moonlight, a strong and tall figure escaped. She had pointed ears, which represented her identity as an elf. On her back was a silver longbow, and on her waist was a delicate war blade, which meant that she was a brilliant ranger who was proficient in both long-range and close combat. There was a special emblem on her chest, which seemed to be surrounded by stars. This was one of the symbols of the Moonwalkers. She was a member of the Moonwalkers who served the Lady of the Silver Moon. For some reason, she was lurking nearby to observe the bloody sacrifice held by the hunters for the god of the hunt, Mailer. Chapter 634. Everything around her was moving backward rapidly. Clarentina Silverblade ran with all her strength, because she knew that if she was a little slower, she would fall into the encirclement of the hunters. Several black shadows were rapidly approaching her from behind. In the vast and desolate wilderness, few creatures could escape the pursuit of werewolves. Clarentina Silverblade quickly realized that it was almost impossible for her to get rid of the other party. According to the current situation, she would be caught up by the enemy in 10 minutes at most. The distance was getting closer little by little. Even as a powerful knight in silver, she was still gradually caught up by the other party. Clarentina Silverblade realized that she might not be able to escape tonight. Ding dong. With a crisp sound, Clarentina Silverblade pulled off the knight in silver emblem on her chest, and then a faint light appeared on it. She threw the emblem into the river in front of her, and then her whole body turned around and rushed into a valley. She had no way to escape. The enemy's footsteps were approaching. Clarentina Silverblade knelt on the ground on one knee. She held the handle of the sword with both hands, closed her eyes and prayed calmly. She knew that this would be the last time she prayed to the Lady of the Silver Moon because the hunters had already regarded her as prey. In this wilderness, she could not get rid of these enemies who had a strong tracking ability, so her expression at the moment was very pious, and she said the last prayer in the ancient Elven language. May my faith not be blasphemed by the enemy, may my sword live up to the name of the Silver Moon. May the Silver Lady guide my soul home. Clarentina Silverblade stood up slowly. Her expression was very firm. She looked at the many enemies who were getting closer and closer in the night. She slowly took out the silver-white bow on her back. She was the knight in silver. As the pride of the knight in silver, she would fight to the last moment. The wind was howling. At this moment, the moon seemed to be stained with a trace of blood red. There was a burst of mournful howls in the valley, and a faint smell of blood drifted with the wind. About 10 minutes later, an unusually burly werewolf walked out with the cold corpse of a female elf. There were 3 sharp arrows stuck in its chest, but it didn't care much about the powerful regenerative ability of dark creatures. The abnormally burly werewolf carried the body that was gradually turning cold on its shoulder and quickly approached the altar. There were other hunters behind it, but many of them were unable to walk. In the deathly silent valley, there were many corpses scattered on the ground. There were gnolls, ogres, lizard men, and humans dressed as hunters. Near the edge of the valley, there was a broken silver-white battle bow. There were cracks all over it as if its owner had used it more than once to block attacks. Not far away, there were broken pieces of exquisite armor stained with blood, and half of an elven battle blade that had been broken by brute force. The valley was deathly silent. Everything seemed to have quieted down. Only the corpse that the hunters had taken away was gradually turning cold. Fresh blood was dripping down from the pale fingertips. It was unknown how much time had passed. Near dawn, a vigorous figure rushed from the forest in the distance. She rushed directly to the river in front of her and then jumped in with a splash. In the mud of the river, she found a special silver-white emblem. A drop of crystal tear fell. The beautiful elf slowly stood up. She followed the traces on the ground and soon found the valley full of traces of battle. Clarentina. My sister. We will avenge you. Anyone who kills the knight in silver must pay the price. The female elf in front of her slowly knelt on one knee, put away the broken silver-white battle bow on the ground, and then pulled out half of the elven battle blade that had been cut off. Her eyes were full of anger and hatred. She turned and flew in the direction of the autumn leaf forest. Arendelle Royal Palace. After spending nearly 3 days, Soren finally reached an agreement with the Princess Royal. In the end, the matter of repairing the Holy Avenger did not come to an agreement. For some reason that Soren did not know, the Princess Royal had always refused to help the paladins to repair this artifact. However, to Soren's surprise, just when he thought that it was impossible for him to borrow the Holy Avenger, the warden suddenly agreed to lend it to Soren. But this required Soren to swear in his own name that he would never want to take this weapon for himself. At the same time, he would immediately return it to the paladins after borrowing it. A god swearing in his own name would have a strong binding force. If Soren made this oath, then he would never try to take over the Holy Avenger. Otherwise he would have to pay a great price. The paladins were also worried about something. In their view, Soren was a person who was both good and evil. In terms of behavior, Soren was definitely evil. However, from the prosperity and stability of Mordor to the prosperity of the South Coast, Soren had done many things that surprised the paladins. This result and request were obviously discussed internally by the paladins. They were probably worried that Soren would take over the Holy Avenger in other ways. It was the first time they met someone who could use the Holy Avenger other than the paladins. However, considering Soren's identity as a god, they forced themselves to accept this. They just didn't know if other gods could use this artifact. They couldn't help but feel worried when they thought of this. During this time, Soren was paying attention to the spread of the plague on one hand, and on the other hand he was also paying attention to the movements of the god of the hunt, Malor. But today the intelligence organization of Mordor City suddenly sent him a very strange message through magic. That was, the figure of the knight in silver had appeared frequently in that area. Soren himself had the title of rogue, so he still had a lot of rogues under his command. The news that came was quite strange. He didn't know why the knight in silver had recently fought with the followers of the god of the hunt. Several head-on conflicts had broken out between them. Another strange movement was that the Church of the Silver Moon seemed to be mobilizing people near Autumnfall. The Lady of the Silver Moon was a very powerful god. Although her power was always very unstable, her beliefs were spread across many races such as humans, elves, beastmen, and so on. She was the only god who did not belong to the elven divine system, but had a wide range of beliefs among the elves. Now the Church of the Silver Moon was also showing signs of activity in that area, which made Soren feel very strange. Did the Lady of the Silver Moon also want to deal with the god of the hunt? Was she trying to steal my kill? Chapter 635. There is one more update today. Because of the appearance of the knight in silver, Soren had to check the information of the Silver Lady. At present, it was still impossible to determine where the Silver Moon Lady was, but it was certain that she had now established contact with her church. Otherwise, the Silver Moon Church would not have made so many moves recently. If a god fell to the mortal world, they would generally contact their church first. After all, this was their main force in the mortal world. The arrival of the Silver Moon Lady made Soren a little nervous. After specially sending someone to inform Vivian not to provoke the goddess, he had the energy to do something else. After paying a small price, Soren finally collected some information about the Silver Moon Lady. God name, Silver Moon Lady, Surin. Other names, Our Silver Lady, Silver Moon Lady, Moon Maiden, Moon Goddess Divine System. None. Divinity, Intermediate Divine Power. Holy Emblem, a pair of female eyes surrounded by 7 silver stars. Residential area, Moon Gate. Alignment, Chaotic Good. Clergy, Moon Navigation Exploration Star Wanderer Good and Neutral War Creatures. Domain, Moon Chaotic Good Star Protection Travel War Creature Exploration Female Lactation etc. Believers, Female Spellcasters Good and Neutral War Creatures, Navigators Monks Sailors etc. Clergy Alignment, Neutral Good Chaotic Neutral. Preferred Weapon, Waning Moon Staff Heavy Hammer. This was the divine template that Soren summed up from various sources of information. It was clear that the core clergy and domain of the Silver Moon Lady was the moon. After collecting this information, he quickly realized the conflict between the god of hunting and the Silver Moon Lady. Thus moon domain and the war creatures, believers. The unusual movements of the knight in silver and the recent actions of the Silver Moon Church seemed to have a deeper meaning. In the current situation of falling to the mortal world and losing most of her divine power, the Silver Moon Lady naturally needed to restore her power. However, the Avatar Crisis was also an excellent opportunity for the Silver Moon Lady who had always wanted to return to the greater divine power. If the Avatar Crisis did not break out, it would be quite difficult to kill another god. Even if they were only gods with weak divine power, they would have to pay a great price to kill them. Therefore, when the Lady of Silver Moon was at her weakest, it was almost impossible for her to regain the power that once belonged to her. But now that the Avatar Crisis had broken out, if the Lady of Silver Moon killed the enemies who had taken away her domain, then she would have a great chance to take back this power. Soren couldn't remember who killed the god of hunting. When the Avatar Crisis broke out, many gods had fallen. The rows of thrones in the Pantheon Temple were not empty. To be serious, Soren did not know many gods. Unless there was an obvious intersection with him, Soren would not deliberately remember these things. However, now the situation was like an arrow on the bow. The hunting priesthood was of great significance to Soren. Even if the Lady of Silver Moon intervened, he had to fight for it. Only by getting the hunting priesthood could Soren enter the greater divine power realm. Otherwise, relying only on the priesthoods like the half-elf and the rogue, the lesser divine power, was already his limit. And if he missed the turbulent period of the Avatar Crisis, it was basically difficult to cross into the intermediate divine power realm. The Queen of Spiders, who could go all the way from minor divine power, banished, to greater divine power, now, was a special case after all. Princess Royal could not leave Arendelle. However, for a spellcaster at her level, space no longer limited her distance. As long as Soren needed a space beacon, she could directly teleport to any place in the material plane. The Holy Avenger was still in the hands of the Paladins. Soren had to bear the backlash of its power. He could only borrow it when the battle broke out. The most important thing now was to locate the body of the god of the hunt, Malor. As a god of the evil alignment, he was still very cunning. At present, he had not exposed the specific location of his body. Soren once again returned to his disguised identity. Next, he would sneak into the Church of the Hunt as a high-grade hunter and judge the location of the god of the hunt according to the bloody sacrificial ceremony. He had fallen to the mortal world. In the process of the bloody sacrificial ceremony, the body would have a connection with the ceremony at the divine level. Unless the god of the hunt did not want the power of the sacrificial ceremony, Soren could always find him. Mordor City. Secret Laboratory. Saruman came to this huge laboratory in a gray wizard's robe. As one of the few wizards in Mordor City, he finally proved his value and loyalty to Sir Soren and Sir Gloria after spending such a long time. After signing a more complicated contract involving the soul level, Saruman finally entered the senior circle of Mordor City. Actually, the main reason was that high-grade spellcasters were too rare. Saruman's attainments in alchemy were very good, and he had been promoted to a high-grade wizard. After discussion, Gloria and Fallen which decided to let him know something. Naturally, the matter of the shadow plane could not be easily exposed. However, this high-grade adept could be of great help when it came to creating golem statues. After spending a lot of experimental research, the two witches finally began to assemble the diamond golems. Soren had a special hobby of making weapons. Originally, with the current number of golems in Mordor City, it was basically not suitable for large-scale production, and the money spent was quite amazing. However, Soren's plan had begun to take effect. The gold mined on Treasure Island had made the wealth of Mordor City endless. He had plans to join forces with the Temple of Wealth to make gold coins. In the case of no shortage of money, it was naturally acceptable to make weapons. The only trouble was that the elemental pool in Mordor City had not yet formed. It could only maintain the normal operation of 30 puppet golems. At present, some of the golems were still in a standby state. Elemental pool. This was the core of a wizard tower and a half-bit wall. In terms of energy, they might have to find a breakthrough point from the arcane tower in the shadow plane. Elven forest. Soren was now dressed as a hunter. He walked in this dense forest in an animal skin coat and followed the original route to the gathering place of the hunters. Gloria sent him a message the day before yesterday. That was that the diamond golems had been completed. The only thing missing at present was the legendary level life activation spell. She would work with the Fallen Witch to master it. If they could successfully memorize it, then the mass production of diamond golems might become a reality. This process would take about a few months, which meant that near the end of the year, Soren would be able to rely on the diamond golems to forcibly break through the defense system of the arcane tower in the shadow plane. Through the dense forest, Soren entered the territory of the elves. Because of the chaos caused by the hunters, many elven towns began to refuse outsiders to enter, especially hunters like Soren, who were rejected by them. Soren did not waste time on the road. Relying on his powerful tracking ability, he quickly found the traces of a small group of hunters. A werewolf, an ogre, a gnoll and 2 orcs. A standard 5-man team. When Soren found them, these hunters were still hiding in a hidden valley and resting. There was an elven town nearby. Soren observed for a while and had an idea in his mind. Polymorph. With a faint light of magic, Soren's figure turned into the appearance of an elven ranger. He turned and rushed in the direction of the elven town and soon arrived at the town's sentry post. Before he got close, someone noticed him and asked in a deep voice, "Who is it?" Soren looked a little embarrassed at the moment. His shoulder was still stained with blood and seemed to be a little injured. "Hunters." Soren disguised himself as a younger elf. He shouted to the elven patrol in front of him, "I found traces of hunters. In the valley over there. They attacked my companions." Hearing Soren's words, there was a commotion in the sentry post in front of him. Then a man who looked like a captain came out and said to him in a deep voice, "Where are they? How many people are there?" Soren glanced at the other party. His strength was probably around the advanced level, which was very suitable for his plan. He immediately said, "There are 5 of them. They are very strong." "Only 5 people?" The elven captain's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard this. He said in a deep voice, "Gather people immediately. Call back the sentry post too. Bring explosive arrows. Let's go and destroy these damn Mailer believers." The elven patrol team had a configuration of 30 to 60 people. The elven captain in front of him directly gathered 27 people. With such an obvious advantage in numbers, he was confident enough to pay a small price to destroy the hunters. Most of the elven guards were profession level 5 or above. However, they were well equipped, and with their talent in archery, it was easy for them to gain an advantage in small to medium-sized battles. On the road, the elven captain was very alert and asked about Soren's origin. He was probably afraid of falling into a trap, but Soren had already done his homework and answered flawlessly. As they got closer to the valley, the elven captain quickly found the traces of 5 hunters. After confirming that there were only 5 enemies, he was obviously relieved. He immediately ordered the others to spread out and surround them, preparing to destroy these damn hunters. However, just as they were about to try and destroy the enemies, the elf who told them everything at the beginning disappeared. Chapter 636. Swoosh. A sharp arrow flew out from the darkness and instantly hit the werewolf among the hunters. Following the elven captain's attack, the other scattered elven patrol guards also stood out, holding their longbows and instantly suppressing the enemy with suppressive fire. The elf patrol guards had amazing fighting power in small-scale conflicts. They were all advanced professions that could fight both close and long range. The leader of the hunters was obviously a werewolf, so the elf patrol guards shot the most arrows at it. In an instant, the werewolf's body was full of sharp arrows. It was hit by 7 arrows in a round of attack. If it were other creatures, they would have died. However, it was a member of the dark species. As a dark creature similar to vampires, the werewolf's life was too tenacious. Even with so many arrows in its body, it could still transform and launch a surprise attack. "Enemy? It's the damn elves." The ogre let out an angry roar and rushed over with his heavy bone crusher hammer. Behind him were 2 orc hunters. They were very smart. After noticing that there was something wrong with the number of enemies, they knew to immediately break through to the side. "Don't let any of them go." The elf captain's face was full of excitement. With such an obvious advantage in numbers, the scales of victory were almost completely tilted towards them. As long as they got rid of the werewolf, the other hunters would not be able to escape. Explosive arrows. Ready. Special arrows were taken out. These were explosive arrows made with alchemy. The price of one was 20 kindler. It was a sharp weapon for adventurers to kill high-level monsters. The value of this thing was higher than gold of the same weight, so even the entire elf patrol guards were equipped with less than 5 of them. It was a strategic sniper weapon. The power of the explosive arrows was equivalent to a small fireball explosion. A concentrated shot could directly kill a high-grade profession. Rumble. A dull explosion sounded. The werewolf was the first to be affected by the explosion. Its whole figure flew out. Its black fur was dripping with blood, but even if it was blown out of shape, the werewolf did not lose its fighting power. After letting out a low roar, it still had the ability to break out. "Damn it. Don't let it escape." The elf captain pulled out the exquisite rapier at his waist, looked around and said in a deep voice, "Follow me and stop him." Once they entered the forest, their bows and arrows were basically useless. There were too many things that obstructed their vision, and the werewolves could easily use the trees to dodge arrows. It would not be easy to chase them in the wilderness. Shrill screams could be heard. The first hunter to die was a gnoll. In the face of more than 5 times the number of enemies, it was shot into a beehive. The victory of the battle belonged to the elven patrol guards. However, what they wanted was a great victory, a battle where they could wipe out all the hunters, so they began to disperse and surround them, preventing any enemies from escaping the valley. The second one to die was the orc hunter. When it realized that it was impossible to break through the encirclement, it suddenly went berserk and killed 3 elven guards. The werewolf was heavily injured, the ogre was heavily injured, and there was only 1 half-beast left. Just when the elven patrol thought that none of the hunters would be able to escape, a sharp arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness. Ah! One of the elven patrol guards was instantly killed. A second arrow came from the darkness, and another elven guard fell to the ground, clutching his chest. There are more enemies. Is it a trap? The elf captain suddenly had a bad feeling, but he quickly realized that the enemy's shooting speed was not fast. This meant that the number of reinforcements was very small, and they could still win by relying on their advantage in numbers. There. A shout was heard, followed by the voices of others. There's only one enemy. A few of you, come with me and take care of him. Soren's figure appeared at the edge of the battlefield. When the elf vice-captain saw that Soren was alone, he immediately rushed over with his guards. Soren was now dressed like a hunter. He looked like a human, but his body was filled with a wild aura. When he noticed that someone was approaching, he immediately put an arrow on his bow and aimed at the elf vice-captain. Swoosh! A sharp arrow pierced through the air. The human in front of him had incredible shooting skills. With a painful scream, the elf vice-captain fell to the ground and died. On the other side, the heavily injured werewolf was getting weaker and weaker. Under the siege of 3 to 5 elven warriors, it was about to enter a state of near death. When Soren's figure appeared, the werewolf's eyes shone with a glimmer of hope. It suddenly sped up and ran toward Soren's position. At this moment, Soren put an arrow on his bow again. He aimed at the elven warriors that were chasing after the werewolf, but at this moment, his expression showed a trace of hesitation. He suddenly turned his bow and shot at one of the elven guards that was attacking the ogre. The werewolf's scream before it died echoed. Soren expressionlessly turned around and rushed down. He pulled out the sword at his waist and prepared to save the orc and ogre that were being surrounded. The casualties were almost done. As the leader of this hunter squad, the werewolf was now dead. Soren actually had the ability to save it, but if it died, it would be more beneficial for his next plan. There were only 2 hunters left. They would be the key to Soren's mission to hunt down the church, so these 2 targets must not die. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Soren finished off the elf warrior in front of him with a single slash. He then continued to shoot at high speed, hitting several enemies. Although they were not fatal, they still broke through the encirclement. Let's go. Break out from there. Soren's voice was very deep. He looked like a rough barbarian. After he saved the ogre and orc that were lucky enough to survive, he immediately put an arrow on his bow and aimed at the elf vice-captain. Soren had the ability to end the enemy's life with this arrow. But in the end he still shot the enemy's shoulder. With his ability, it was not difficult for him to wipe out all the elven patrol squads, but he did not have the slightest intention of doing so. The reason was simple. Kill a portion of them and let the rest return alive. Their hatred and anger would make the conflict between them and the hunters even more intense. Soren needed to use their hatred to destroy the church's strength. Chapter 637. The 3 figures disappeared into the dense forest. In fact, there were traces of blood left by the hunters on the ground. These elven patrol guards also had rangers who were proficient in tracking, so it wasn't difficult to catch up with them by following the blood and footprints. But the damned human hunter seemed to have turned around and looked at them before he left. His eyes seemed to be telling them that if they caught up with him, more people would die. The hunter's shooting skills were too amazing. He could shoot at high speed and while moving, and even the elves couldn't raise their heads. Damned hunter. The elven captain pulled out the arrow from his shoulder and angrily hit the tree next to him with his fist. Since Soren saved the other hunters, the elves naturally thought that he was also a hunter. At the same time, the 2 surviving hunters also thought so. The reputation of the Church of Hunting was very bad. The gods of the chaotic evil alignment were all like this. Except for a very small number of believers, the rest of the gods maintained a neutral or hostile relationship with the hunters. How are the casualties? The elven captain let his companion next to him bandage his wound, and then his face turned ugly. How many people did we lose? An old ranger came over and said with a dignified face, 7 dead, 6 injured. We killed 3 hunters. We found these on their bodies. It seems to be a special token. Damn it. The elven captain angrily hit the tree next to him again. If the human hunter didn't appear, they could kill all these hunters. It didn't matter even if there were some casualties. But now 2 of them escaped and their own casualties were so serious. Hatred, anger, and guilt made him feel uneasy. What about the elf? I don't know. Maybe he ran away during the battle? Captain, do you think this is a trap? It shouldn't be. The elf didn't lie. Even if it is a trap, there can't be only one enemy support. Did you find any footprints of him leaving? Yes. He left towards the south. South? Isn't that the direction where the hunters escaped? He couldn't have chased after them alone, right? I don't know. Captain, what do we do now? Get someone to send the message and the token. These hunters have been getting more and more rampant recently. I'm going to write a letter to ask the Elven Court to send a ranger to support us. Is it a windrunner? The voice sounded excited. I don't know. Clean up the battlefield. Go back and strengthen your defenses. We can't let these hunters mess around in our territory anymore. The Elven patrol quickly left. However, about 10 minutes later, a vigorous figure appeared nearby. It was a high-grade rogue. Judging from his appearance, he was an elf. On his chest was a rare emblem that looked like a meteor with a long tail. This emblem was rarely seen in the human world because it represented the god of thieves and elves, Erefin-Irazel. After a long period of time, the power of the priesthood had been distributed many times. In particular, the domain power of many gods involved each other, which led to some gods holding the same or similar priesthood power. The god of thieves and elves, Erefin-Irazel, was a lesser divine power god. He was a member of the elven divine system. There was not much information about him, but he was often called the naughty clown. His core was the priesthood of thief and prankster. His domain included chaos, elves, luck, and craftiness. He was a god of a race. His belief was limited to the elves, and most of it was spread among bards and thieves, so the outside world did not know much about him. At this moment, the elf rogue walked around the battlefield, then left a mark here and then left in another direction. Because the god he believed in controlled the luck domain. Therefore, it was said that the believers of the elven god of dexterity and thieves, Erefin-Irazel, would be blessed by luck. Very few creatures from the outside world believed in him, but he was still quite influential among the elves. Believers who were favored by this god would get extra luck bonuses. What an annoying hunter. About half an hour later, another elf appeared here. She looked normal, but after seeing the mark left on the ground, the female elf shook her head with dissatisfaction and murmured, I can't let them interfere with the plan of the Queen of Gods. I must let the Queen of Gods attack these guys. Otherwise, we can't determine the whereabouts of Erefin-Irazel. There was no doubt. This was not a real surface elf. She was a drow disguised as a surface elf. The web of conspiracy of the Queen of Spiders had begun long ago, and the elven divine system that the Queen of Spiders hated the most was undoubtedly the elven divine system that had once exiled her. There were quite a few members of the elven divine system. Even the Queen of Spiders did not dare to rashly start a war, so she targeted the weaker gods among them. The god of elves' dexterity and thieves, Erefin-Irazel, had reached the level of intermediate divine power at her peak, but as the shadow domain fell to others, this deity fell back to a lesser divine power. However, relying on a luck, crafty, and thieves' domain power, this god was still the backbone of the elven divine system. The reason why the Queen of Spiders targeted him was very simple. Crafty. This was one of the core domains of the Queen of Spiders. Killing this god could greatly increase her power and allow the Queen of Spiders to further master the powerful, crafty domain. Basically, there was a very obvious characteristic of the battle between the gods. That was, many of the gods who were at war either had conflicts in their domains of divinity or were the same or similar in their domains of divinity. The same domain of divinity was a potential opponent. Defeating these opponents could not only reduce the number of competitors, but also improve one's own strength. The female elf quickly left. But before leaving, she used a spell to send a message. She believed that this message would soon be sent to the Underdark. On the other side, after using a little trick, Soren successfully mixed into the ranks of the hunters. As for whether he was a follower of the god of the hunt, Mailer, these guys in front of him could not tell. What he had to do next was to prepare a bloody sacrifice and then attract the attention of the god of the hunt. Chapter 638. The Hunter's Camp. When Soren came here, he clearly felt a few hostile eyes, but when the other party saw the emblem he was wearing, a blood-stained beast claw, the hostility of the other party was obviously reduced a lot. At this time, Soren looked like a hunter in the wilderness. His face was rough and strong, and his body had a very fierce and wild aura. The belief of the god of the hunt, Mailer, was also spread among the humans, but it was limited to the evil hunters. Other than that, only a few humans would choose to believe in the god of the hunt. Londeko. A burly half-orc appeared in front of Soren and the others. He stood with a trace of blood on his body. After glancing at Soren coldly, he asked, "Why are only the two of you back? Who is this human?" Londeko was the ogre hunter. He glanced at the half-orc in front of him, who seemed to be the leader, and said in a dull voice, "We were attacked by the elven patrol. Everyone else is dead. This is Soros, a hunter from near the misty forest, and a companion who serves our lord. If it wasn't for his help, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to come back." Soros? The burly half-orc glanced at Soren, and his expression became a lot gentler. Then he said, "Okay. You guys come in first. There's something important to discuss later." The church of the god of the hunt, Malor, was very narrow. Not only were the areas scattered, but also the races were mixed. This was his greatest drawback. The church that served Soren had a strict internal order. Basically, the priests and core members of the church were very clear about it. But the church of the god of the hunt couldn't do this. Therefore he spread his faith across races, and the church was more scattered in small groups. Now, even if they were gathered together, there was no way for the hunters to completely recognize each other. Even because of the desire for legendary blood, even if you were not a follower of the god of the hunt in the past, as long as you could offer a legendary sacrifice, the god of the hunt would even be willing to accept you as a follower and give you a trace of divine power as a reward. Evil god could only give two kinds of gifts. One was power. Very few gods would bestow divinity. Most of them would bestow a sliver of divine power. This sliver of divine power was already very powerful for mortals. The second was wealth. Money was nothing to the gods, and most of the evil gods were very generous in this regard. There were about 10 people in the camp. Soren also saw the body of a dead male elf with the emblem of the queen of the forest, Marikai. It was a unicorn with a golden horn and blue eyes. She was a member of the natural god system, a powerful god in the neutral and good camp. The unicorn goddess was her mount in battle. The queen of the forest was also an enemy of the god of hunting. However, the natural god system also had an obvious characteristic, that was, the church was quite scattered. This goddess didn't even have a proper temple. Her followers mostly prayed in the sacred forest or other altars. However, she had a large number of rangers as her followers. This was because her clergy was the goddess of the forest and rangers. Marikai was a humorous and kind god. She always had a confident smile on her face. She was very cautious about making friends, but once she recognized them as her friends, she would protect them passionately and loyally. Although she understood that death was also a part of the cycle of life, she was not as cold as the oak tree father. Instead, she often intervened to heal the pain of creatures out of sympathy. Her incarnation was often a beautiful woman with brown hair and brown eyes. She had a strong and elegant body and wore a set of green and brown leather armor. The church of the Queen of the Forest was very concerned about the wilderness. In such areas, the rangers were often the only line of defense against danger. Many people thought that her priests were far more willing to find the balance between the development of civilization and the protection of nature than the elves hiding in the forest. In addition, her church was also seen as an indispensable force against the fierce and cruel Malor followers. The Queen of the Forest had a very good relationship with the god of travel and the god of light, and worked hard to fight against the evil gods, especially the god of hunting, Malor, the lord of storms, and the lady of poison. This is. Soren pretended to be surprised and said slowly, "A follower of the Queen of the Forest?" The burly half-orc glanced at Soren and said calmly, "Yes. This ranger wants to spy on our camp. But my lord is in charge of tracking, so he is just a prey to us." "Your name is Soros? Looks like you have some skills. Very good. We are preparing an important plan, and maybe your power can help us to complete it more easily." Soren nodded expressionlessly. It seemed that choosing the god of hunting, Malor, as his target was the right choice. First, he was evil enough, and second, he had enough enemies. Killing other gods could easily anger the gods they belonged to, or cause the gods they were on good terms with to hate them. But the god of hunting, Malor, was different. He had many enemies but not many allies. The consequences of killing him were minimal, and it was even possible to gain the favor of some of the good gods. However, after learning more about the god of hunting, Malor, Soren became more and more afraid of his strength. There were so many enemies, but he was still alive. In terms of combat power, he might be stronger than he thought. The god of hunting, often represented high combat power. Night fell. A group of hunters quickly gathered around the campfire. The half-orc in the lead glanced at the others and said in a deep voice, "My lord needs to offer more prey. This is the oracle that he has sent to us. Only the blood of legends can satisfy our master, so we must hunt down an enemy of sufficient strength. Here." The burly half-orc took out a simple map, then pointed his black finger at a place in the south of the forest and said in a deep voice, "There is the prey we need here. A holy unicorn. A beast blessed by the unicorn goddess. This will be a very challenging hunt for us. But if we succeed, I believe that everyone here will be rewarded by my lord." Blood of the unicorn. My lord was very satisfied with the unicorn we offered last time. I believe that everyone knows its benefits and soon there will be more forces to help us. We are going to do something big this time. Chapter 639. The combat power of the hunters was very strong. Perhaps it was because of their faith that hunting was a very common part of their lives, which gave them far more combat experience than other professions. If a simpler analogy was used, it would be that many of the hunters were elites, which made them much more difficult to deal with compared to ordinary professions. It seemed that the followers of the clergy related to the slaughter category were quite difficult to deal with. The god of massacre was like this, and the god of murder was like this later on. Even the followers of the god of hunting were just as strong. It seemed that the church of hunting was now in a state of being surrounded by enemies, but under Soren's observation, they were not at a disadvantage because of this. First of all, the hunters were used to moving around in the wilderness, which made it difficult for many enemies to find their tracks. Even if someone found their tracks facing the followers of Mailer who had mastered the tracking clergy, the end result was undoubtedly the same as the ranger who believed in the queen of the forest, becoming prey in the eyes of the hunters. The losses of the hunters were not small, but it was not as great as imagined. Judging from the size and traces of the camp, Soren found that after the camp was built, they had lost more than 10 people. In comparison, the losses of the other churches were likely to be even greater. This was something to be wary of. That was when he really went deep into the enemy's camp to spy. Soren found a very serious matter. The average strength of the members of the Church of Hunting was quite high. There were basically no hunters whose strength was below grade 3, and their average profession level was above 10. If they were to add their own biological talents, their strength would be much stronger. In contrast, the strength of Soren's church was uneven. The middle and high-grade church members were obviously not as strong as the veteran church of hunting that had been developing for a long time. Take this camp as an example. There was actually a half-legendary orc and 5 high-grade hunters. But these were not the key points. What really made Soren ponder was whether the hunting clergy was like the killing clergy, which had the ability to rapidly increase one's strength. It was mentioned before. On the spiritual level, it could increase the proportion of soul energy absorbed after killing the enemy. This increase in slaughter EXP was about 5% to 25%. The reason why the Church of Hunting had so many middle-grade and high-grade followers was probably related to the power of the clergy. The next day, when Soren got up, he noticed that the body of the elven ranger who worshipped the queen of the forest was gone. Instead, there was a horrifying skull in the hands of the orc leader. This was a special ritual of the hunters. The belief of the orcs was that they could seize the enemy's power. After killing a powerful enemy, they could absorb a part of their power into themselves. Such a ritual would be carried out differently depending on the race. Ogres and gnolls believed that only by eating their enemies or digging out their hearts could they gain the power of their enemies. Some werewolves believed that they should eat their enemies' hearts, and some believed that howling to the moon after a hunt could awaken the ancient power in their bodies. This kind of ritual was common among hunters, so many of these hunters had a rich collection. Note: in the area of ancient shamanism, many tribes believed that through certain rituals, they could obtain the power of the enemy they killed. The hunters moved out the next afternoon. This time, a total of 13 hunters were dispatched. If Soren was included, it would be exactly 14 people. Among them, the strongest was the orc leader, whose profession level should be between 18 and 20. Next were 5 hunters with a profession level of 15 to 18, and the rest were basically masters with a profession level of 12 or above. Their target was the unicorns. Unicorns were one of the favorite prey of the god of hunting, Mailer. Unicorns were rarely seen in the material plane. Only in the depths of the elven forest could one be lucky enough to see these powerful and beautiful creatures. Unicorns in the material plane were not very strong. Because some of them had been crossbred with Pegasi and horses, their bloodlines were mixed and they had lost their original template of a heavenly creature. That was how the wildebeest was born. However, even an ordinary wildebeest was around level 3 to 6. The pure-blooded unicorns were generally level 15 and above, and with the template of a heavenly creature, they would be level 20 and above. Adding the word holy, they would have to raise the challenge level by 1 to 3. Their protector was the unicorn goddess, Rui. The hatred between the god of hunting and the unicorn goddess had been going on for a long time. The relationship between them was probably much more intense than most forests. The unicorn goddess loved to wander around. As a god of the chaotic camp, her character was also somewhat capricious. However, once she thought that the other party was trustworthy, she would show a loyal friendship and would never abandon her believers in trouble. This was very similar to the queen of the forest. When she had to face a battle, Rui would be a very difficult enemy. However, what she liked most was all kinds of relaxed banter, clever puzzles, novel discoveries, and all kinds of joyful exploration in life. This goddess was more casual in her private life, perhaps because her body was a divine unicorn. Rui's church did not have any formal clergy system, nor any temples or altars built in her name. Although some races such as unicorns, pegasi, and the intelligent owls worshipped her as the guardian goddess of their race, most of her believers were abandoned people who were awakened due to their own unique abilities, such as the Enlightenment spell recipients. Note: the Enlightenment spell can grant wisdom to animals. There was a passage that recorded this goddess. Rui's church holds an all-night celebration every year, filled with all kinds of wild banter and noise. There are many wild riding competitions in the countryside or across the sky, as well as all kinds of exaggerated skits, witty speeches, satirical debates, and romantic confessions. Many unicorns also choose to mate and reproduce that night, and the believers have their own joy. Occasionally, the incarnation of the goddess will appear in such a celebration. The unicorn goddess's hatred for the god of hunting, Malor, was very strong. She strongly condemned the king of beasts' crime of assisting the Red Robe Sorcerers Association to create black evil unicorns. Although the Red Robe Sorcerers had long disappeared in the long river of history, there were still some black evil unicorns left in the plain. In contrast, the god of hunting, Malor, was also happy to taste the blood of the unicorn goddess. He had always regarded her as another target worth hunting. At night, a group of hunters gradually approached the inner part of the elven forest. The hatred between the god of hunting and the unicorn goddess had lasted for thousands of years, so the believers of the church were eager to hunt down the unicorns. The hunters' plan was very thorough. They would sneak into the forest at midnight, complete the hunt, and quickly leave. They had already scouted the surrounding terrain, so even if the nearby elves reacted, the hunting ritual would have already been over. Soren did not want this to happen. Therefore, he believed that although the hunt would be successful, the elves would still discover them. It would be best if more than half of the hunters died here. Chapter 640. Under the quiet night sky. Everything was quiet. The cold moonlight shone in the depths of this beautiful forest, and a clear lake could be seen in front of them. Under the moonlight, the water looked like a crystal, as if it contained some kind of dreamy power. In the legends of the elves, it was said that there was a water spirit living in this lake, but very few people could see her. However, it was undeniable that there was a power shrouding this place. In the darkness, some strong figures were lurking around. The hunters had brilliant tracking and sneaking skills. They waited patiently near the lake, waiting for their prey to appear. Water. This was a place that most wild creatures couldn't leave. There was a trace of life energy in this lake, so many nearby creatures liked to replenish their water here. A pitch-black cheetah appeared by the lake. The hunters didn't make the slightest move. Although this was also a good prey with the strength close to the high grade, they weren't looking for this kind of trash today. As believers of the god of hunting, they were very clear about the habits of unicorns. It was said that the unicorn goddess was the daughter of the Silver Moon Lady, but there was no basis for it. The relationship between the two gods was not very close. The closest ally of the unicorn goddess was the queen of the forest. Her relationship with the Silver Moon Lady could only be said to be friendly. If the Silver Moon Lady gave birth to a daughter, it shouldn't be a divine unicorn, so there must be some relationship between the two, but in fact, it shouldn't be the identity of mother and daughter. It was interesting to say. The enemies of the god of hunting, Malor, almost all had a close relationship. The queen of the forest, the unicorn goddess, the Silver Moon Lady, and so on. Most of his enemies were close allies. This was also why Soren didn't dare to act rashly and attack other weak gods, because he might accidentally provoke a very powerful enemy. Unicorns had a habit. They liked to wander in the forest under the quiet night, especially when there was moonlight, so the probability of them appearing today was very high. Hunting required patience. Although many of these hunters were from the chaotic camp, they were quite patient. They lurked nearby and didn't move, scattered and surrounded the lake. However, they didn't notice that one of them had left a little. The night was getting darker. Suddenly, a sparkling light appeared in the forest in the distance. Then, a majestic unicorn with a pale golden horn appeared in their line of sight. It had snow-white fur and looked like a creature that had walked out of a dream. The cold moonlight shone on its body and seemed to reflect a faint glow, illuminating everything around it. A divine unicorn. To be able to be crowned with the name, Holy, it was naturally related to God in this world. It was a creature favored by the unicorn goddess. Not only did it have a trace of power given by God, but Soren also felt divinity in it. This was a divine creature. The hunters hiding in the darkness couldn't help but look at the unicorn with burning eyes. The unicorn in front of them still didn't feel the approaching danger. It leisurely strolled along the lakeside, enjoying the tranquility and serenity of the night. It retained the bloodline of a heavenly realm creature, so the light on its body was actually a symbol of power. The characteristics of a heavenly realm creature were still in effect on its body. The unicorn slowly came to the lakeside. It leisurely lowered its head to drink. Suddenly it seemed to feel something. It raised its head and looked around vigilantly, but it didn't see anything in the darkness. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Arrows were shot from all directions. These +2 arrows hit the target in an instant, leaving wounds on the beautiful fur of the unicorn. Drops of blood dripped down. The unicorn let out a roar full of anger and panic. At this time, a metal net suddenly fell from the sky and covered it in place. Success. Hearing the excited roars of the other hunters, 5 figures rushed out in an instant and shouted, "We've trapped it! Everyone do it! Kill it and we'll leave immediately!" A dazzling explosion of light. For a moment the surroundings were as bright as day. The sudden burst of light directly blinded many people. The long pale golden horn on the unicorn's head emitted a faint glow, and waves of magic waves gathered. Piercing shot. The hunter's second round of shooting came in an instant. The unicorn, which was temporarily trapped, had no room to dodge. All of a sudden, its magic was forcibly interrupted, and its injuries became more and more serious. The result of the battle was almost doomed. Facing the siege of more than a dozen hunters, even if this holy unicorn had legendary strength, there was no possibility of survival. After all, it was just an intelligent beast. But, just when the hunters felt that their prey was about to die, suddenly, a vigorous figure appeared under the moonlight. Their bodies seemed to be surrounded by the power of the wind, approaching at a high speed in a low-altitude glide. One jump was dozens of meters away. Soon they were close to the quiet lake that was destroyed by blood and slaughter. Wind chasers. Another ranger unit of the elven race had the strength not weaker than the knights in silver. Swoosh. A rain of arrows came, and in the blink of an eye, 2 hunters fell to the ground. Kill the unicorn first. The burly orc leader was shocked and angry. He didn't know why his plan failed and was suddenly discovered by these elves. It was as if they had received the news long ago. The holy unicorn was seriously injured. In this case, the most important thing was to complete the mission at all costs. In the darkness, a sharp arrow flew out, ending the life of this divine unicorn, as well as the pain it was enduring. You stay and stop the enemy. The burly orc leader was overjoyed. He carried the unicorn's body and broke out of the forest, taking away the sacrifice to the god of hunting and leaving the others behind. As long as the god of hunting was satisfied, these casualties were nothing at all. The elves must have also rushed here temporarily. So they didn't have the advantage in numbers. Maybe it was a subconscious action. The burly orc leader tasted the blood of the holy unicorn's throat. Although the blood was still delicious to him, he didn't know why he always felt that something was missing. But at this time, there was no time for him to think about it. After putting away this important sacrifice, he quickly escaped into the primitive forest at night. The battle was still going on. However, the hunters who stayed behind to cover the retreat might not be able to make it back. Chapter 641. I'm sick. Sorry. Soren's figure was hidden in the night. With his powerful stealth ability, even if these wind chasers were the elite elves, it was unlikely that they would find his trace in the night. The hunters who stayed behind had suffered heavy casualties. The few survivors saw that the situation was not right and fled in other directions. Soren also began to attack in the night, tracking the traces of the hunters, and directly killing these guys secretly. These enemies should not go back alive. The more the enemy's strength could be weakened, the more advantageous it would be for his later plan. At dawn, Soren rushed back to the hunter's camp. This time, 14 people went to the mission and only 4 people returned. A total of 10 hunters with a profession level of high grade and above died. Even a god's church could not afford such casualties. It was equivalent to all the high-grade officers of a fleet of Mordor being killed. Although the hunters succeeded in killing a holy unicorn, the nearby hunters were basically hit hard and lost the ability to fight head-on with the elven rangers. When Soren returned to the camp in the form of a hunter, there was still a trace of blood on his body. It looked like he had been through a difficult battle. Nearly half of the people inside were gone, but they did not seem to be sad. On the contrary, they seemed quite excited. Because the sacrificial ceremony to the god of the hunt was about to be held. The god of the hunt was a very generous god. In his history, he had never been stingy with giving enough rewards to his believers. Whether it was wealth or power, as long as the ceremony succeeded in pleasing him, they could get rich rewards. The evil gods were similar in this regard. In the Underdark, if a drow matriarch succeeded in pleasing the Queen of Spiders once, the status of the whole family would be improved, and the family would be prosperous for a long time. The sacrificial ceremony soon began. The god of hunting did not have many temples because his followers were often active in the wilderness. Therefore, a simple altar was enough to offer sacrifices to his prey. The body of the holy unicorn was carried up. Now this beautiful legendary creature had become a cold corpse, and drops of blood were sprinkled along the altar. The orc leader in charge of the sacrificial ceremony. He was chanting the prayer of the Church of the Hunt, ready to call Maelor's avatar to appear. A faint light appeared. A very powerful aura appeared on the altar, and then some kind of power formed an illusory figure that looked like a huge mutant baboon. The god of hunting had noticed this and quickly formed an avatar on the altar. It was ready to feast on the prey offered by its followers. The 2 gnoll hunters carried the unicorn's corpse up to the altar. A perfect sacrifice should have been to offer up the prey and then kill it on the spot, but this was definitely not enough. The figure of the god of the hunt, Maelor, moved slightly. On the corpse of the holy unicorn, a faint blood-red radiance, invisible to the naked eye, emerged. This radiance gradually poured into the phantom of the god of the hunt, but it seemed to be quite rare. The burly half-orc leader continued to chant the prayer. The whole ceremony would take a long time, because this was still a sacrificial offering. However, at this moment the shadow of Maelor, the god of the hunt, suddenly let out an angry roar. A telepathic ripple transmitted his words. "How dare you fool me?" The god of the hunt, Maelor, seemed to feel that he had been fooled. His mood became very irritable and full of anger. He suddenly waved his sharp claws and roared, grabbing the half-orc leader in front of him. Then white brain matter mixed with blood splattered. The half-orc with near-legendary strength died just like that. The blood-red radiance continued to appear, but this time it appeared from the corpse of the half-orc leader. This power temporarily calmed his anger and allowed his distorted body to gradually recover. The sacrificial ceremony was interrupted. The phantom of the god of the hunt, Maelor, roared angrily. He who had satisfied his thirst for blood, did not continue to kill. He looked at the followers around the altar, watched their frightened eyes and then slowly disappeared. Everyone stood rooted to the ground. The other hunters looked at the 3 corpses on the altar in a daze. One was the half-orc leader, and the other 2 were the gnolls who carried the unicorn up. They were killed in an instant. These hunters did not understand why the god they served suddenly became angry and killed the followers who were holding the sacrificial ceremony. The entire sacrificial ceremony ended in failure. Whether it was the god of the hunt, Maelor, or the hunters who held the sacrificial ceremony, they did not get what they wanted. This was because there was something missing from the offerings they had offered. The god of the hunt's anger was very simple. After his avatar appeared on the altar, he made a loss. The prey offered by the followers could not make up for the divine power he consumed, let alone restore his power. This seemingly powerful prey had actually lost its value. Apart from a little power contained in the flesh, he did not get anything. In short, the reason why the god of the hunt was so angry was, where did the divinity go? Of course the divinity was with Soren. This divine unicorn provided him with 2 points of divinity, as well as over 200,000 slaughter EXP. As the son of slaughter, Soren almost absorbed the soul and divine energy of any enemy he fought. The hunters only offered Maelor the shell of a unicorn. This sacrifice was not even comparable to an ordinary unicorn. Soren's figure had already disappeared among the hunters under the altar. All of a sudden, A sharp arrow shot out from the dense forest, followed by the figures of the elven rangers. They rushed towards the hunters who were still in a state of confusion. They were ready to kill all these damned enemies in one fell swoop. It did not matter who led the elves to the hunters' camp. Soren felt a very strange power during the sacrificial ceremony just now. This power was very similar to his identity as the Son of Slaughter, and it also made him vaguely guess something. In history, the Son of Slaughter's strength increased very quickly because they could absorb the power of the enemies they killed. Soren felt a trace of power similar to his own from Malor, who had just mastered the hunting clergy, but there was also a big difference. Malor could also absorb soul energy, although the way he absorbed it was not the same. But one thing was certain. This was definitely a gift from the hunting clergy, which made it easier for him to absorb soul energy and divine energy. Chapter 642. A failed sacrificial ritual. Soren finally determined the approximate location of the god of the hunt, Malor. He also confirmed that the god of the hunt, who had just fallen from the divine kingdom, had lost a lot of power. Otherwise, he would not have killed his own followers because of a failed sacrificial ritual. Judging from the last scene, the god of the hunt should have taken the orc leader who was in charge of the ritual as a prey, and then made up for the divine power consumed by his avatar. With the outbreak of the avatar crisis, it had become extremely difficult for many gods to receive faith and divine power. Soren had a great temple as a relay, but Malor could only rely on his avatar to absorb power because of his own reasons. Today's gods were similar in this regard. If Soren's followers were not praying in the temple or near the city of Mordor, then the power of faith he could absorb was very limited. The avatar crisis affected all aspects of the god's abilities. In the past, if someone mentioned the name of a god, then within 24 hours, some powerful gods could directly see the person who mentioned the name and the situation nearby if they wanted to. This was a bit like the gods. Although the gods could not easily appear in the mortal world, they could easily know many things in the mortal world. But now it was not possible. The power of divinity had been greatly weakened, and many gods could only maintain the most basic ability. Any power of divinity that used to be very easy to use now required a lot of divine power. This situation would continue until the end of the Avatar crisis. Now, no matter who it was, all gods needed to rely on their saint form to perceive the outside world. Even if there were believers in Mordor calling Soren, he could not feel or notice anything. The real body of the god of the hunt, Malor, was in the deepest part of the wilderness. It seemed that he was also a smart guy. He knew that he had many enemies, and his saint form did not dare to get too close to the area of human activity. He was probably afraid of encountering other gods who had fallen into the mortal world. Soren was ready to find out. If he could determine where Malor's real body was, then he should consider how to kill him. Frostleaf City. This was a city near the north. Not far from it was the ruins of Silvermoon City, a city that was once very old and glorious. The Northern Witches originated from Silvermoon City Sorcerer Organization. Now this once glorious city had been buried by history, leaving only some ancient ruins in the depths of the earth. The powerful magic lock had also been moved to the tower by the Northern Witch Council. Now only Frostleaf City was still thriving nearby. Under the cold moonlight, a petite figure sat on the roof, staring blankly at the moon in the sky. She had a pair of furry cat ears, and the tail on her little but was moving as if she was bored. At this time, there were no pedestrians on the street, but there were many guards below the mansion she was in. They were all experts, and at a glance, one could tell that they were the kind of guys who had been through hundreds of battles. The power of Mordor City had extended to many places. Because Vivian planned to incorporate the Church of Fear, Soren sent out many of his elites. Now, most of Mordor City's energy was on Vivian's side. The Fear cultists were already very weak. This was one of their few strongholds, and now it had become the hidden power of Mordor City. Meow. Lulu shaved her claws in boredom, looked at the moon in the sky and murmured, "It's so boring here. Mordor City is still fun. So many fish. Meow. I can swim in the sea and catch fish every day. How free." As a beastkin. Although Lulu had a good status in Mordor City, she had no friends around her. She rejected the approach of others. Except for some of the highest people in Mordor City such as Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch and so on, she was only a little familiar with the High Priest of the temple. Beastkin were a group of people who were very adapted to being alone. Maybe they had been used to it for a long time. Nowadays the number of beastkin was getting fewer and fewer. A cat-type beastkin like Lulu could only be seen in the Eastern Kingdom. Most of the time, Lulu was a little follower behind Vivian. She was an optimistic cat girl who was easily satisfied. A simple life in Mordor City could make her feel satisfied. This may be caused by her childhood experience. The survival of beastkin had always been difficult. When she first saw Soren, she was being sent to the south coast in a cage by the slave ship. Life outside Mordor City was boring. At least Lulu thought so. Master was busy incorporating those fear cultists and had no time to play with her. Fighting was also boring. As Vivian's personal maid, Lulu had only fought once or twice so far. Although she wanted to tell others that she could fight more than them, in fact, there were still few opportunities for her to fight. Master was getting more and more powerful. Many powerful guys in Mordor City were sent here. The outside world was not the same as she imagined. What she saw was not wonderful but a difficult life. The longer she left Mordor City, the more she missed that place. In the dark alley in the distance, there was a group of refugees. They heard that the lizard men were attacking humans over there, and now many people were running here with their families. War, chaos, hunger. In Lulu's simple understanding, the outside world seemed to be full of these things. A breeze blew by. Just when Lulu turned her head in boredom, she suddenly saw a beautiful woman walking in the moonlight. The moonlight sprinkled on her body as if there was an illusion. Lulu actually saw a little silver-white halo on her body. It was a beautiful woman. Words couldn't describe it. Her body was full of an aura that made Lulu feel close, and even made her feel a trace of motherly warmth. Child. The beautiful woman walking in the moonlight suddenly appeared beside Lulu. It was an unusually intimate aura. The other party's touch made Lulu curl up involuntarily, as if she wanted to get closer to her. No one had ever made her feel so close. She had always been very repulsed by humans, and there were only a few people who could make her feel close to them. This beautiful woman in front of her had a more gentle aura than Gloria, who used the enlightenment spell on her. It even made Lulu put down all her guard. She raised her little head and glanced at the other party and said, "I'm looking at the moon." There was a faint smile on the beautiful woman's face, and there seemed to be a trace of joy. She said slowly, "Do you like the moon?" Lulu nodded and said, "I like it. I like it very much. Meow. Whenever the moon is full, I feel the moonlight on my body so comfortable." She was a beastkin. Basically, all beastkin had some kind of mysterious connection with the moon. Lulu's talent was awakening, and the brilliance of the moon would awaken her potential at a specific time. The beautiful woman smiled as if she was a mother. She stroked Lulu's forehead and said, "My child, I'm very happy to see you again. Would you like to go with me? I want to leave here. If you want, you can go with me." Ah. When Lulu heard this, she suddenly woke up. She looked at the beautiful woman in front of her in a daze. Her cute little face showed a hint of hesitation and struggle. She didn't know why, but the other party made her feel very close, and she could feel that the other party would never hurt her. But when the other party proposed to leave with her, Lulu couldn't help but hesitate. Meow. The little cat girl thought for a long time, then raised her head and said seriously, "Meow. I'm afraid not. Although Lulu likes you very much. But Lulu already has a master. I can't leave the master and go with you. The master is in trouble now. She has a very, very powerful enemy. Although the master's brother is also very powerful. But the enemy is too powerful. Meow. Lulu wants to stay by her side. Help her defeat the enemy. Oh. When I help the master defeat the enemy, I'll go play with you again, okay? Lulu likes you very much." The beautiful woman in front of her was stunned. Then she showed a gentle smile, reached out and stroked Lulu's long hair and smiled, "Okay. You're a good child. Since you don't want to leave with me, then I'll leave you a gift. My name is Suluan. I'm your protector. If you're in danger, you can call my name." The beautiful woman stretched out her white slender finger and tapped Lulu's forehead. Then there was a trace of silver-white holy light. Some kind of transcendental power of law turned into a blessing and stayed on the little cat girl. When Lulu came back to her senses, the beautiful woman had already left. Everything seemed to be a dream. P.S. I've been sick recently. Sorry. I hope everyone can understand. After all, the author is also a human. Sometimes I can't help when I'm sick. Chapter 643. New Moon Year 1676, 11th of October. One night, on the old ruins of Silver Moon City, a strange silver light suddenly shone. This light could be seen even from far away. The light only lasted for a short time. Then a deep crack appeared on the ruins of Silver Moon City. The crack went all the way to the underground ruins. Standing next to the crack, one could vaguely hear strange noises coming from the ruins. This strange time was quickly transmitted to many places through various channels. 3 days later it was sent to Soren. Barren High Slope. Soren glanced at the magic message and murmured, "Has the Silver Moon City Ruins Instance Dungeon been opened?" "So it's opened at this time." Silver Moon City Ruins. In the past, spellcasters had to go to the Instance Dungeon. There were many secrets hidden in it. After all, Silver Moon City was one of the most prosperous and powerful cities at that time. During the Avatar Crisis, there was a saying among the adventurers, only wizards who graduated from Silver Moon City Ruins are considered true high-grade spellcasters. The reason for this was simple. It wasn't that Silver Moon City Ruins would drop some amazing equipment. The main thing was that there was a special secret room in there. There was a very rare enchantment method recorded in it. Tattoo enchantment. This was a special technique mastered by the red-robed wizards a long time ago. No one knew why it was left in one of the secret rooms. This special enchantment technique allowed wizards to permanently engrave a spell on their body as a tattoo. This spell could be permanently engraved. In theory, it could be engraved on a level 8 spell. In Soren's adventurer team, there was a wizard who permanently engraved a dragon wing spell on his body. This technique was very useful for wizards. Although it might affect the appearance, it was very practical. The barren high slope was connected to the orcs' territory. The orcs in the western wilderness hadn't fought with humans for a long time, although it was related to the sudden disappearance of the god they worshipped. The impact of the Battle of the Orc Gate lasted for thousands of years. A god system from another world affected this world near the last age of turmoil, which led to many unexpected accidents. There were still some followers of the other world's god systems left in the desert area. For many races, as long as the orcs didn't start a war, it wasn't a big deal. Perhaps it was his nature. There were many gods in the orc god system who had a war domain. The orc main god's core clergy was conquest, and there was also a war god who had the clergy of war. Many of the conflicts that had been going on for a long time had the shadow of the gods behind them. Soren passed through a highland covered with thorns. What appeared in front of him was a strange forest. It was strange because there were many corpses of wild beasts and some traces left behind by elves. The followers of the god of hunting included many intelligent evil beasts. Everything in front of him told Soren that a battle had taken place not too long ago. What surprised Soren the most was that the elves acted faster than he expected. They even went straight for the boss behind the scenes. Where did they get the confidence to challenge a god? Soren stared at the corpse in front of him. He saw the emblem of the knight in silver. Sure enough, it was the knight in silver who did this. Only they could track the location of the god of hunting, and they were even faster than Soren. Was the Lady of Silver Moon also here? This was the first thought in Soren's mind, but he quickly threw it aside. The enemy of the Lady of Silver Moon was her sister, Lady Night. If the Lady of Silver Moon showed up here, the probability of Lady Night intervening was quite amazing. In the end, a terrible disaster might break out in advance. The two goddesses who had been fighting for countless years might fight before the Avatar Crisis really broke out. The power level of Lady Night was not to be trifled with. If they really fought, the whole world would be seriously affected. The Lady of Silver Moon shouldn't be here. Soren quickly reacted and realized that he still had a chance. He murmured, "Before the fall of the goddess of magic, the power of the Lady of Silver Moon had always been below the mid-level divine power, which meant that she had to avoid being tracked by Lady Night. In the current situation, she can't be the opponent of Lady Night. So the possibility of the Lady of Silver Moon appearing here is actually quite low. It should be only the knights in silver who came here to deal with the god of hunting." But why do they think they can succeed in killing a god? This was the biggest feature of the Avatar Crisis. Even mortals could succeed in killing a god. It was precisely because of this that it led to the terrible turbulence. All the gods were in the form of saints. In theory, anyone could die in the Avatar Crisis. The immortal characteristics of the gods had disappeared. Once, even if they died, they could be resurrected. But now, basically, any god who died was really dead. The god of hunting, Malor, was now equivalent to a top legendary creature with an amazing challenge level. Perhaps his profession level had reached between level 35 and 40, so he had a part of the realm power and retained a small amount of divine power. If he was really willing to sacrifice human lives, he could definitely be killed. In the past, many gods were killed by adventurers in this way. There would always be a time when their divine power would be exhausted. The space around the battlefield was sealed, and even the gods in the form of saints could not leave. Soren left a spatial coordinate. Plans always seemed to be unable to keep up with changes. The world would not stop because of his will. Many things had already happened, but he did not know many of them. Even if he knew, there was nothing he could do. The traces of the battle became denser and denser. More bodies of war creatures and elves began to appear in front of him. The knights in silver obviously had the upper hand. In the process of moving forward, Soren also saw a terrible trace. The trace was left on the body of a burly werewolf. Judging from the breath of life, this werewolf should be a legendary creature, but it was killed in an instant. A divine artifact. Soren took a little look and confirmed this. These knights in silver brought the divine artifact over. It was still uncertain which divine artifact it was, but its power was quite amazing. The material plane had always kept some divine artifacts. Most of these divine artifacts were in mortal organizations. A conservative estimate was that there were dozens of divine artifacts left in the material plane, but I'm afraid that only a dozen or so had really appeared in the eyes of the world. These divine artifacts would only appear on a large scale when the Avatar crisis completely broke out. The reason was simple. Using these divine artifacts could easily break the divine shield of the saints. By this time next year, more and more divine artifacts would appear. This is? Soren suddenly stopped and frowned. He turned over a body in front of him and said with an ugly face, "Paladin?" The body of a paladin. It was not from the paladin organization in the desolate Gobi, but a paladin who stood in the glorious faction in the human kingdom. The god of the hunt, Malor, was in the chaotic evil faction. For most of the good and orderly paladins, this god of the hunt was simply not pleasing to the eye. The Holy Avengers did not deal with him personally, largely because it was too far away. Is it a battle paladin who accidentally joined because of the idea of justice, or is there really a paladin organization involved? Soren could not help but speed up his pace. As they entered the depths of the forest, they could see the altar and statue of Malor, the god of the hunt. As a god who lived in the wilderness, he did not have a magnificent temple. The temple and altar in front of them should be the core area where his faith spread. There were more and more corpses on the ground, and there were traces of bloody sacrifices nearby. Something must have happened. Otherwise, the knights in silver would not go straight into the lair of the god of the hunt. Shadow hide. There were traces of fighting in front of him, and Soren's figure disappeared into the darkness in an instant. An altar with a diameter of more than 300 meters. There were many statues erected next to it, and behind it was a primitive temple built in the jungle. The last thing that Soren wanted to happen happened. He saw many knights in silver, a group of broken monks who served the weeping god, and a group of paladins in silver armor. The whole vicinity of the temple had turned into a battlefield. Knights in silver, believers of the god of suffering, followers of the queen of the forest, paladins, and some people that Soren could not be sure but should be in the good and orderly camp were fighting with a group of hunters at the moment. In the center of the altar was a huge creature with black fur and a scarlet face that looked like a baboon. It was difficult to describe the appearance of Malor, the god of the hunt, in words, but its head was a bit like the most powerful demon lord of the abyss, the two-headed baboon. Around him was a team of legendary crusaders, including a legendary paladin, a legendary monk, 3 legendary knights in silver, a legendary droll, a legendary priest of the weeping god who was proficient in healing, and a ranger part-time priest who should be serving the queen of the forest. Of course, it was still impossible to kill the god of the hunt with these people alone. After all, the god's body had terrible power. So something that surprised Soren even more appeared. He finally knew what had killed the legendary werewolf, because in the hands of the paladin, he saw the other most powerful weapon in the material plane. Pale justice. P.S. I feel much better. I should be able to recover tomorrow. I suddenly realized that today is my birthday. A cute roll around. Chapter 644. The Pale Justice. This legendary weapon was one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane. Judging from its appearance, it was completely ordinary. It was almost the same as a novice longsword bought on the streets. There were no gorgeous decorations at all, and there were no gems or runes inlaid on it. This artifact looked so ordinary, but it was precisely because of this ordinariness that made it extraordinary. So much so that Soren could confirm without hesitation that it was the legendary Pale Justice, at a glance. This was a legendary divine sword. But there was only one purpose to make this sword: to destroy evil. Although it was such a powerful weapon, the Pale Justice had a rather ordinary origin. This simple sword was made by a man named Renaud, who was a devout believer of the god of justice. Renaud had spent 30 years to perfect his metal processing skills, and because of this he was able to create flawless blades. After Renaud finished this simple weapon, he immediately dedicated it to the Church of Tyr. The priest who received the sword put it on the altar in the monastery. He asked the brothers in the church to pray with him to the god of justice, asking God to give the sword divine power. But they never touched the sword and they never even mentioned it. 10 years later, when the other priests had given up on the hope of giving the sword divine power, the priest who initiated it, Idan, continued to pray silently. Another 20 years passed, and the god of justice still didn't show any miracles. The priest of the god of protection who came to visit mocked him for blindly believing in the sword. But at this time, Idan suddenly stood up and walked to the altar, gently taking the dusty sword from the altar. The priest of the god of protection asked Idan, "Have you finally regained your sanity?" Idan replied, "I've always been clear-headed, but I've always prayed for the wrong things from the god of justice." He said that the god of justice had done this a long time ago. The priest of the god of protection laughed at Idan's statement, and asked his personal guard to draw his sword. The guard's gorgeous weapon was inlaid with pearls, the blade was engraved with runes, and there was also a pile of tiny rubies. The priest of Heim laughed and said, "Your weapon is like a normal soldier's sword, and it's much inferior compared to ours." Idan calmly grasped the hilt of his sword and swung it at Helm's weapon. Priest Heim's laughter quickly faded away. All he could do was stare at the guard's broken sword. When Idan put down his sword, Priest Heim stood there without saying a word. Idan said, "Compared to the power of vanity and appearance, justice is always inferior and pale. However, I expected Tyr to manifest his miracles with lightning or fire on this sword. I should have remembered how this sword came into my hands. Through simple love and humility. Justice applied to everyone regardless of wealth, status, or knowledge. Whether in the farmer's field or on the battlefield, justice is everywhere." In the end, Idan took the sword to a local weapon shop and ordered a wooden, leather-wrapped handguard. He then passed the sword to a new holy knight and taught him to always remember the potential of love and kindness in the hearts of humans. Perhaps it was because fate favored the Saint Samurai. Or perhaps it was because the Saint Samurai easily provoked powerful enemies. Two of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane could only be used by the Saint Samurai. They were terrible weapons against evil. Whether it was the Holy Avenger, or the Pale Justice, either of these two weapons in the hands of a Saint Samurai had the possibility of killing a god. The battle on the altar was difficult to determine the winner. With the strength of Malor, the god of the hunt, he should not be afraid of these legendary professions. However, if the Pale Justice was added, then the result would be completely different. No god of the evil alignment could resist this artifact with flesh and blood. Not to mention Malor, even the powerful Queen of Spiders and the Lady of Night could not do it. Because purely from the perspective of lethality, the Pale Justice was more amazing than the Holy Avenger. Item type: Pale Justice, +4, item grade. Grade 4 artifact, item description. The Pale Justice is the ultimate weapon to destroy evil. When fighting against any evil enemy, it will erupt with terrible power. This weapon has been blessed by the god of justice and retains powerful divine power. Therefore, only Saint Samurai can use this weapon. Its birth has a very memorable story, which is why it is called the Pale Justice. Requirements: Strength 14 or above. Can only be used by Saint Samurai. Equipment effect: Artifact characteristics: Immunity to all control spells, cut-off characteristics, resist evil, resist chaos. +12 sharpness, +10 penetration, +12 toughness, +10 armor break, +10 holy damage. Artifact effect: Immunity to all control spells. When holding this artifact, the user is immune to all control spells, including but not limited to mind control, charm spells, fear spells, intimidation spells, and so on. The wielder's mind and will are protected by the power of justice. No one can control them. Weapon special effect: Cut-off characteristics. When hit by this weapon, it will cut off any non-artifact weapons. There is a certain chance to directly damage legendary armor. Weapon special effect: resist evil. This weapon will be blessed by the power of justice when fighting against any enemy of the evil alignment. It is regarded as a grade 7 artifact. Plus 15 sharpness, plus 13 penetration, plus 15 toughness, plus 13 armor break, plus 15 holy damage. Weapon special effect, resist chaos. This weapon will be blessed by the power of order when fighting against any enemy of the chaos alignment. All damage dealt will be increased by an additional 10 points of the power of order. The god of the hunt, Mailer, was from the evil alignment. Not only was he from the evil alignment, but he was also the opposite of the Saint Samurai, chaotic evil. How strong was the Pale Justice? To be honest, Soren was not very clear about its actual power. However, he knew that this artifact had forced the Queen of Spiders to retreat. It had even stopped part of the Queen of Spiders' plot during the Avatar crisis. Of course, at that time, the Saint Samurai who held this sword was not the one in front of him, but another great guy. Whether it was the Holy Avenger, or the Pale Justice, these two artifacts were precious treasures that belonged to the Saint Samurai. For a long time, these two artifacts only had the right to use and not the right to own. They would never belong to any Saint Samurai alone. Only those who were chosen by these two artifacts could become the users of the artifacts. This system had lasted for a long time, so the users of the artifacts had always changed. Sometimes, they even fell into the hands of the enemy in the process of fighting against evil. However, the Saint Samurai could always get them back at all costs. At all costs. It was really at all costs. The craziest time that the Saint Samurai launched a general attack on the headquarters of an evil god in order to take back the Pale Justice. The Pale Justice. For some reason, Soren always felt that the name of this artifact was full of poetry. This was one of his two favorite artifacts. The other one was called the Black Demon Sword. That sword seemed to be no longer in the material plane. It was said that it had fallen into the hands of a powerful devil in the Bator Inferno. The battle in the center of the altar was in a stalemate. Fortunately, the god of the hunt, Mailer, did not have a wizard level. If Soren remembered correctly, this god's creature level was frighteningly high. He belonged to the kind of creatures that were born into the realm of legends. Then he also advanced some warrior abilities. More specifically, no one could figure out. It was only certain that the god of the hunt still had the strength domain. Generally speaking, those who had mastered this domain were basically melee fighters. There was no doubt about it. Gods were not omnipotent. As a melee god, the god of the hunt, Mailer, could only rely on the power of the gods to obtain the blessing of divine spells that were equivalent to a level 20 priest. As for the spells of wizards, he could basically forget about it. From this point of view, he might be easier to deal with than the demigod vampire. This was because the god of the hunt, Mailer, should not be able to stop time unless his divine power could support an outbreak of the power of the time change. However, Soren did not think that he had such power. After all, Soren had not mastered the power of the time change until now. Gale Strike. The broken monk, who had been wandering on the edge of the battlefield, seized an opportunity. His figure suddenly turned into a residual light and used a move that Soren had never seen before. If he had not seen it before, then it must be a move from the Eastern Kingdom. Sunfire style. Accompanied by the rumbling explosion, the legendary monk seized the opportunity and made a series of consecutive moves. Their bare-handed attacks were very fast, and many of their abilities were continuous like a storm. On the surface it seemed that the god of the hunt was at a disadvantage because he had not launched any effective substantive counterattack. Basically, from the beginning to the end he was dodging the attacks of the Pale Justice. For this reason, he had even been attacked several times by other professions. He was afraid of the Pale Justice. There was no doubt about this. Soren also could not withstand the attacks of the Pale Justice. Therefore, the god of the hunt did not hesitate to be attacked several times by others to avoid the Pale Justice's attack. However, it was impossible for a real god to be completely suppressed by a group of legendary professions, even if they were holding a legendary sword. Even Soren had a way to solve the situation in front of him, let alone the more experienced god of the hunt. So far, the god of the hunt, Mailer, had not opened any domain of divinity. He was waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 645. Hunters were always very patient. In the face of being suppressed by the enemy, the god of the hunt, Mailer, was actually patient enough to not activate his divine domain. Perhaps he was not only afraid of pale justice and was looking for an opportunity, but also worried about the appearance of other gods nearby. When the knight in silver appeared on the battlefield, Soren was worried that the Lady of Silver Moon would also appear. Malor, the god of the hunt, did not come and go as freely as Soren as a rogue. The reason why he did not activate was probably because he was trying to find the Lady of Silver Moon. These two gods did not have much hatred, but the conflict of their divine domains was higher than most of the hatred. Finally, Malor, the god of the hunt, finally understood that he could not continue like this, because if he did, the divine power points that he had accumulated with great difficulty would be used up again. Therefore he seized the gap in the enemy's cooperation and launched a counterattack. For the gods, any encirclement attack that was half a beat too slow was a flaw, and unless they could achieve the level of the gods' layers back in the dark zone, they would not gain the upper hand by relying on sheer numbers of legends. The greatest advantage of a rogue was reflected in the situation in front of him. Soren was an outsider to the whole battle. He could easily observe everything, but when the time was right he could cut into the battle in an instant. This was something that no other profession could do. With the end of the Broken Monk series of Eastern strike techniques, Malor, the god of the hunt, let out an angry roar. Suddenly, a pair of sharpened wrist guards appeared on his arms, directly blocking the attack of Pale Justice. This was his only artifact, a third-grade artifact, Beast's Claw, made with his own divine power and divinity. Artifacts were things like artifacts. Even if you were a god, you couldn't make any divine weapon. Even if you used the knowledge of a god, you could only make a legendary item at most. Any divine weapon in this world required a god to pay a great price to make it. This kind of infusion of divinity meant a permanent consumption of power. No god would easily make a divine weapon. Therefore, a considerable number of gods only had one artifact. For someone like Soren who didn't even have a proper divine artifact, it was obvious that he was a newly ascended god. In the material plane, there were some divine weapons that were more advanced than those in the hands of god spirits. Of course, in the past, god spirits were in their god kingdoms. Those divine weapons did not have much of an effect on them. But now that they had fallen into the mortal world, those divine weapons were quite a threat. Pale Justice was a Tier 4 divine equipment. When fighting against evil, it would receive a boost from the power of justice, making it equivalent to a rank 7 divine artifact. In terms of lethality, Malor's Beast Claw was far inferior. Although the previous god of justice had already fallen, the god of the hunt, Malor, would not be able to easily resist a divine weapon personally bestowed by a greater divine power. Clang, clang. A series of parries sounded. Malor, the god of the hunt, did not launch an effective counterattack, but by relying on the Beast Claw, he no longer had to hide from Pale Justice. He was ready to fight back. From the moment he took out the Beast Claw, Soren knew that he was waiting for an opportunity to break out of this situation. And this opportunity soon appeared. At the moment when the paladins and Droll took turns to attack, they temporarily exposed the priests behind them. This process may not have taken more than 0.1 seconds, but it was enough for the gods. Power, Realm. The god of the hunt, Malor, was still very cautious. The realm he activated was one of his most peripheral abilities. When the Power Realm was activated, the air in the whole battlefield seemed to become heavy. Rumble. The huge body of the god of the hunt, Malor, directly rushed over. He did not directly hit the priests behind him, but smashed his fist on the ground under his feet. The earth trembled. At this moment, the power of the explosion was probably more than 40 points. The terrible vibration directly appeared like an earthquake out of thin air. The whole altar was fragmented and terrible cracks appeared on the ground. With Malor's attack as the center, an explosive shock wave was formed, followed by spider web cracks. The temple behind collapsed in an instant, and everything within 300 meters was affected by this terrible power. The impact of this punch was even more powerful than the explosion of a missile, and it directly shook all the people surrounding him away, moving mountains and filling seas. When one's strength reached a level of more than 40 points, it was a terrible ability to move mountains and fill seas. Few people in the material plane could resist such terrible power, and it was just a matter of time for them to collapse a mountain with one punch. A shadow flew past. Malor, the god of the hunt, was known as the king of beasts. His most powerful attributes were undoubtedly strength, agility, and physique. Most of the strength-type gods had around 35 points. If the blessing of the strength field was included, then Malor's strength was definitely above 40 points. There was no record of the origin of the god of the hunt, Malor. However, this guy looked very much like the most powerful demon lord in the abyss, Demogorgon. Demogorgon was a terrifying two-headed baboon, while the god of the hunt in front of them looked like a one-headed baboon. Casualties appeared in an instant. The first to fall was undoubtedly the priest in the team. All the defensive force fields were easily broken under the attack of the gods. The priests of the god of weeping were torn apart by the king of beasts in an instant and were torn into pieces on the spot. The hunter has become the prey. The king of beasts said a sentence in the ancient language of the abyss, and in an instant he rushed to another enemy. He gave up the paladin who was holding the pale justice, and also gave up the monk and the knight in silver who were agile and flexible. The most powerful attribute of the priests was perception. They could not escape the pursuit of the king of beasts. In an instant, countless attacks were launched at the king of beasts. Now that one of the priests had died, they could not allow another part-time priest to die as well. However, the king of beasts did not care about their attacks. With the divine shield activated, the god of the hunt, Malor, endured all the attacks and rushed to the priest who was a part-time ranger. As long as the priests were all dead, the next battle would be much easier. Chaos, Realm, Evil Realm. Two realms were instantly activated by the god of the hunt, Malor. As one of the old gods, his realm covered a large area. Even Soren had a row of data in front of him, affected by Chaos, Realm. Alignment, Order. Test of immunity failed. Within the range of Chaos, Realm. Any ability test has been negatively affected by -2. Affected by Evil, Realm. Alignment, Evil. Additional ability buffs have been obtained. Within the range of Evil Aura. Any ability test has received +2 additional buffs. Chapter 646. The Realm of a True God. The realm power possessed by a god was not something that mortals could easily contend with. Within the realm of a true god, the power of the rules would become more effective against them. This change was like the adaptation of the rules of different planes. Soren's body was still suffering from a -2 immunity penalty in the abyss. The effect of this immunity was invisible, but it was real. The realm of a true god was simpler and more domineering. Those who were compatible with the realm power would be buffed, and those who were not would be affected. The god of hunting activated the realm of chaos and the realm of evil. Compared to the realm of non-gods, the realm of a god was much more powerful. The evil aura of the devil could reduce the immunity of the enemy of the opposing faction by -1, and at the same time, increase the immunity of the evil faction by +1. This was a 2-point difference in the immunity of the evil faction. The evil aura of a god could cover the target of all factions. The opposing good faction would reduce the immunity of the enemy by -2, while the neutral faction would reduce the immunity of the enemy by -1. In other words, when the god of hunting, Malor, activated 2 realm powers at the same time, the gap in strength between the two sides was widened. The god of hunting gained a 4-point bonus in the immunity of the enemy, while the others suffered a 4-point reduction in the immunity of the enemy. It was a total of 8 points in the immunity of the enemy. The immunity of a god in the form of a saint was not as high as one would expect. Some people who became a god too easily might not even have a higher immunity than Soren. However, after activating 2 realm powers, most of the immunity would not work on the god of hunting. This is bad. Soren realized what was going to happen next and murmured, "Unless someone immediately buffed us with its protection from evil spell, the battle will be one-sided." Protection from evil. It was the simplest first-tier spell, but it was such a low-tier spell that could greatly reverse their disadvantage in the current situation. Spells did not necessarily have to be high-level to be useful. The effect of protection from evil was to resist all kinds of evil forces, including the evil aura of the gods. This spell could make up for 1 point of immunity. This group of people in front of him had to refresh their buff against evil and chaos to offset some of the negative effects of the realm. The priest was dead. The god of the hunt, Malor, would not give them a chance to cast spells. Currently, the only one on the battlefield who had the chance to cast spells was the paladin holding Pale Justice. Paladins began to gain divine abilities after entering the higher ranks. Although they could only cast low-level divine spells, there was still hope for them to deal with the situation in front of them appropriately. Protect from evil. The paladin's reaction speed was quite fast, but the situation on the battlefield changed the moment he cast the spell. Blasphemy. Malor, the god of the hunt, uttered the most ancient syllables of the abyss. This was a language that existed before the birth of the Orbis demons. The blasphemous language was born from the power of the blasphemy language. A power that Soren could not comprehend erupted. The blasphemy spell cast by Mailer, the god of the hunt, seemed to have an effect similar to the legendary spell, Death's Command, or a low-level version of Life and Death. The seriously injured priest in front of him was directly wiped out in an instant. All the immunity tests and legendary abilities seemed to have completely lost their effect at this moment. The legendary profession in front of him was directly drained of all his vitality by the blasphemy spell, and then turned into a pale and cold corpse. Hunt clergy. Soren's body broke out in a cold sweat. In an instant, countless analysis information flashed through his mind. He thought to himself, this is definitely the ability of the hunt clergy. A weakened version of Life and Death's Command. It seems to have an effect similar to the legendary spell, Death's Command. Judging from the injuries suffered by the legendary profession just now, he should be in a state of serious injury. The effect of the blasphemy spell should be to directly kill creatures with less than 150 HP. I must not let myself be seriously injured. Soren got an important piece of information at this moment, that was, in the process of fighting against the god of the hunt, the enemy may have the ability to directly kill the seriously injured target. This was simply killing. Sure enough, Soren's initial guess was right. Any clergy related to killing had the ability to directly wipe out life. The battle was on the verge of collapse. The cooperation between these legendary professions was not good enough. Perhaps they were not as good as Soren's adventurer team. It was estimated that many of these legendary professions did not know what kind of abilities their teammates had, and what their fighting styles and special skills were targeted at. They were just a group of legendary professions that were temporarily put together. Although they were powerful, they could not achieve the effect of 1 + 1 is greater than 3. More importantly, they lacked a mage to hold down the fort. A legendary spellcaster would always be needed in a high-end battle. First of all, a legendary spellcaster's survivability was strong enough, so there was no need to worry about being killed by a god's body. Secondly, a legendary spellcaster's threat was enough. If there was a legendary spellcaster on the battlefield, even if the legendary spellcaster did nothing, the god of hunting would be much more cautious than now. This was something that the priests could not do. Priests had the ability to cast spells, but in the realm of legendary and above, they were far behind the wizards. They can hold on for another 10 minutes at most. Soren judged the current situation and said to himself, if the god of the hunt does not intend to continue to reveal other trump cards, then he can kill all of the legendary professions in front of him in 10 minutes. In the end, there should be a paladin left. If you want to kill him, you will have to pay a price. Pale justice. It was the only weapon that could deter the god's true form. If it was not for the presence of this artifact, he would have already started killing. According to Soren's estimation, even if the god of the hunt, Mailer, maintained the divine shield with all his strength, he could only withstand 3 to 5 attacks from Pale Justice at most. After that, his divine power would be depleted to maintain the shield. An ordinary person holding this weapon could also cut off more than 30 HP from the god's true form. The god of the hunt, Mailer, had at most 800 HP. If the divine shield could be broken, any legendary professions who held it could kill an evil god's true form within 10 effective attacks. The battle in front of them was about to be decided. At this time, even Soren could not help but feel a little anxious. He murmured, "What's going on? Why isn't the Princess Royal here yet?" Chapter 647. Otherworldly God's Servant. As the battle became more and more unfavorable to them, the thoughts of these legendary professions began to become chaotic. At this time, someone actually summoned the otherworldly God's servant. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis affected all the divine kingdoms, and almost all the otherworldly God servants in the divine kingdoms lost about 20% to 30% of their combat power. They were now estimated to be less powerful than an ordinary legendary. Moreover, if the otherworldly God servant could kill an evil god, why would the other gods fight? An unqualified legendary cannon fodder. The act of summoning the otherworldly God servant once again led to the collapse of the battle. More importantly, after the death of the two priests, the only one who could summon the otherworldly God servant was the paladin with pale justice. Perhaps it should be called a paladin now. This was another faction of paladins. They believed in light and justice. Most of them served the god of light, and therefore had more powerful spellcasting abilities than other paladins. only limited to holy light magic. One of the iconic points was that they could automatically obtain a legendary summoning spell after entering the legendary realm. Otherworldly God Servant. They could summon an angel from Mountain Paradise. This kind of existence from the divine kingdom was collectively known as the Otherworldly God Servant. This was a very powerful ability. But the premise was that it had to be against other legendary figures, and not against the true form of a god. The battle completely collapsed. The act of the paladin summoning the otherworldly god gave the god of the hunt, Mailer, an important opportunity. He rushed to the paladin in front of him in an instant, and then risked being hit by the other party. He was ready to kill the enemy with pale justice. As long as the paladin died, no other legendary figure could hold pale justice. Of course, he himself could not hold this weapon, and he could not even touch it. Wuxia. A stream of blood splashed out, and the beast's claws easily tore the armor on the paladin's body. Then his abdomen was cut open and even the intestines were pulled out. However, the paladin did not die because of this. Because he had legendary abilities such as armored skin, legendary sturdiness, perfect physique, and so on. This kind of injury could only make him constantly bleed, but not directly trigger the test of death. Clang, clang. A series of fierce confrontations broke out. The seriously injured Saint Samurai roared, as if he had given up hope of survival. There was a resolute determination in his eyes. At this moment, his combat effectiveness had suddenly improved greatly, and he was almost on par with the god of hunting. Sacrifice. The Saint Samurai already had the belief that he was going to die. And when a person fought with the conviction that he was going to die, the potential that would erupt would be quite astonishing. Evil slaying slash. The sacred samurai who was covered in blood was quite imposing. While the others were holding back the god of hunt, the sacred samurai used evil slash and pale justice to directly break the enemy's divine shield, and then left a deep wound on the god of hunt. He was injured. As a god in the form of a saint, he was not only injured but also seriously injured. However, this was the only way to fight. In Soren's eyes, the courageous paladin had become a dead man. The kind of thing that could still fight for 300 rounds after being seriously injured was only suitable for mortals. In this kind of battle at the level of gods, such people would never be given any chance. No matter how tough a Saint Samurai was, no matter how many legendary specialties they had when they were on the verge of death, they would never have the chance to use them again. Order, death. Legendary spell. As a god in the form of a saint, Mailer, the god of hunting, had an additional spell-casting ability equivalent to a level 20 priest, and this ability ignored divine spell slots. As long as he had enough divine power, he could cast spells indefinitely. A legendary spell. Order, death, directly took away the life of the Saint Samurai. Even if he could still fight for 300 rounds, he would never have such a chance. The battle at the level of gods was not so flashy. Life and death, victory and defeat were often decided in a moment. Enemies who were seriously injured and dying rarely had a chance to turn the tables. Because sometimes even the explosion of a small universe was useless. There were too many ways to directly erase the enemy, like order, death, clang. Pale justice fell to the ground, and the sharp blade was directly inserted into the ground. The body of the Saint Samurai slowly fell. All his vitality had been taken away by the spell, and his whole body became pale and cold in an instant. The outcome had been decided. With the death of the Saint Samurai, these legendary figures in front of him could no longer kill the god of hunting. A blood-red light appeared in his eyes as if he had activated the clergy of bloody lust. He did not seem to be in a hurry to kill these people in front of him. Instead, he suddenly said in a low voice, "The identity of the hunter and the prey seems to have been switched. Run away. Run away in fear. Maybe you can escape from my hunt." Hunting ritual. When the god of hunting, Mailer, said this sentence in front of him, Soren suddenly had this idea in his mind. Absolutely not. In an instant he figured out all the reasons and also understood that he had to do something. Mailer, the god of the hunt, held the priesthood of hunting. Although this priesthood was related to the priesthood of slaughter, it was not an orthodox priesthood of slaughter. Therefore, even Mailer himself could not absorb the divine power and soul power of the enemy as easily as Soren. However, it was not that he could not absorb it at all. As the name suggested, the clergy of hunting had the same meaning as the literal meaning. In the case of the hunting ritual, Mailer could also have the same ability as Soren. He could increase his strength in the midst of killing. Although 3 of the legendary professions in front of him had died, there were still many left. If the god of hunting, Mailer, killed them through something similar to the hunting ritual, then the increase in strength this god would obtain would be quite amazing. The sole power of 6 legendary professions. Whether it was to increase one's own basic ability or restore one's own divine power, it would make the challenge of the god of hunting much more difficult. There was only one meaning in Mailer's words, and that was that he was going to hold a hunting ritual himself. This time. He was the god who accepted the sacrifice of the hunting ritual, and also the hunter who participated in the hunting ritual. Soren finally decided to make a move. However, the moment he was about to make a move, a transmission spell came too late. Princess Royal had finally arrived. Chapter 648. The biggest advantage of a rogue was that they could always get the upper hand. As a god who held the title of rogue, although Soren watched the whole process of the battle, no one found his trace and was aware of his existence. However, when Princess Royal came here, the fluctuation of magic could not be hidden from the perception of the gods. It directly alarmed the god of the hunt, Mailer, who was in the middle of the battle. He could not help but slow down and look at the distance vigilantly. This place had been subjected to dimensional imprisonment. The reason why Princess Royal took a little time to teleport here was that she had to do a space jump from outside the dimensional imprisonment to here. A legendary wizard or sorcerer. It was impossible for a priest to have such brilliant spatial skills. Only wizards and warlocks could do this. The attention of the god of the hunt was attracted by Princess Royal, who had not yet appeared. Soren also seized this moment of opportunity and rushed to Pale Justice on the ground. At this time he could not wait to use the Holy Avenger. Originally it was just a test, but he did not expect the other forces to move faster than him. After today's incident, the god of the hunt would definitely be more careful, so Soren could only take the opportunity to kill him. Shang. A figure appeared out of thin air beside the corpse of the paladin, and slender fingers grasped the hilt of Pale Justice in an instant. Terrible pain erupted. Soren could not help but tremble as if he was holding a red-hot iron in his hand. Pale Justice rejected his existence more than the Holy Avenger. Even with the talent of omnipotent hands, Soren received more than 30 points of holy damage the moment he touched it. At the same time, the residual power of the artifact was still constantly causing damage to him, almost completely cancelling out Soren's own regeneration ability. Many artifacts in this world had faction requirements, so a wrong artifact might not be as good as a legendary equipment. Shadow Hide. The moment he got his hands on Pale Justice, he once again hid in the shadows. Anti-detection cloak. Mailer, the god of the hunt, was a little panicked. He realized that even as a god, he could not see through Soren's invisibility. Immune to all detection spells. This legendary equipment was also effective against gods in the form of saints. The god of hunting could only use other methods to determine Soren's location. Mordenkainen's disintegration. Princess Royal's figure finally appeared. She was wearing an azure court dress and looked like a noble girl on an outing. When the figure of Princess Royal appeared on the battlefield, the surrounding air suddenly turned cold. Sparkling snowflakes appeared one after another. Some kind of domain power similar to ice and snow was activated by Princess Royal. Suddenly, the surroundings seemed to have entered winter, and the ground froze into ice at an astonishing speed. Changing reality. Princess Royal's domain power directly distorted the surrounding environment, and such a squandering of divine power caused everything to enter winter. It's the Princess Royal of Arendelle. One of the knights in silver who was fighting had a look of surprise on his face and murmured, "It seems that we have hope to end this evil god." Princess Royal is the most powerful spellcaster in the Frost Kingdom. Legend rating. Although there were not many opportunities to fight, Princess Royal's legend rating was still very high. Mordenkainen's disintegration. Luxury disintegration. Greater dispel magic. As a top-notch spellcaster, there was no doubt that Princess Royal's talent in combat was quite amazing. In the face of such a battle between gods, she was very smart not to use any offensive spells. Instead, she started with 3 consecutive dispelling spells. The resistance of the saint form was frighteningly high. Soren was directly immune to 1 to 3 circle spells. The resistance of the god of hunting was probably even stronger. Even legendary spells were unlikely to kill him. In this case, the most effective tactic was to remove all the defensive spells and buffs on the opponent. A series of spells were broken. There was an explosive effect on the body of the god of hunting, Mailer. At least 3 types of buffs were removed, and at the same time, a piece of equipment was directly decomposed. It was a special ring. It should not be at the level of a divine artifact, because Mordenkainen's disintegration only had a 1% chance of decomposing a divine artifact. It was estimated that the legendary item had been successfully decomposed. The god of hunting had 1 less piece of life-saving equipment, which would be an important advantage for the next battle. Ice Prison. Sharp icicles rose one after another. The elder princess's casting speed was quite amazing, and many of her spells were almost instantaneous. With a slight vibration, the sharp icicles locked onto the traces of the god of hunting, trying to trap him in place. Boom! The ice was shattered by brute force, and a black shadow ejected from the ground, waving sharp claws and stabbing at Princess Royal in front of him. Instant displacement. With a flash of magic, the Princess Royal's figure disappeared before his eyes. The figure of the god of hunting, Malor, landed. His scarlet pupils looked around vigilantly, not only looking for the position of Princess Royal, but also looking for the trace of Soren. Traceless steps. Piercing shock palm. The broken monk still had a strong deterrent ability in the peak-level battle. Relying on his strong perception, the monk seized the opportunity to launch a surprise attack. A rain of arrows came. The other legendary figures present reacted very quickly and took this opportunity to launch a counterattack. Bang bang bang. A series of attacks fell on the body of the god of hunting, but they maintained a distance of about 10 centimeters and did not really touch the opponent's body. The divine shield was still there. Even with legendary combat power, it was difficult to break the opponent's divine shield at once. Divine shock wave. In the face of the siege of many legendary figures, the god of hunting chose the most violent and effective way to counterattack. Divine power burst out in all directions in the form of shock waves, and then figures were seen being shaken out. There were still pieces of blood left in the sky. The power of divinity. Soren, who was wandering in the darkness, was shocked because if the god of hunting mastered Divine Shield and Divine Shock Wave, then he must also have mastered the ability of Divinity, Avatar. In short, it was immunity to all magic effects for a certain period of time. Many gods who were proficient in combat had mastered this ability. Soren had only seen the Queen of Spiders use this divinity. Mark of the Hunt. As if dissatisfied with the high-speed harassment of the monk, the god of hunting, Malor, suddenly raised his hand and pointed at him, directly projecting a special mark on the monk's body. The next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared and then appeared behind the monk. Poochie. Blood splashed out, and the +3 artifact Beast Claw directly pierced through the monk's heart. Even with his powerful perception, he could not predict this attack, and one of the legendary professions on his side died in an instant. Tracking Domain. In the face of the sudden appearance of Soren and Princess Royal, Malor finally could no longer hide his trump card and directly launched his core divinity. Tracking Divinity. Soren suddenly felt a gaze locked on him. There was no time to think, he immediately launched Shadow Jump. A beam of cold light appeared behind him. The god of hunting, Malor, appeared almost a millisecond away from him. Although Malor could not see Soren's figure, the divinity of tracking could help him find the position of Soren. Slaughter Transformation. Looking for the right time to launch a surprise attack seemed to be ineffective. Soren's tactics were affected by the divinity of tracking, and he could only fight head-on with his opponent. Greater Roar. The figure of Princess Royal appeared again. She raised her hand and cast an 8th-level spell. Suddenly, a terrible sound wave broke out. It was like the highest level of Lion's Roar, almost covering the whole battlefield and directly shaking everyone. This kind of attack was quite effective. The figure of the god of hunting paused almost instantly, but Soren was also affected. Sound wave attack. Most gods did not have high resistance to sound wave attacks, so this was a very effective way to attack. In the face of this kind of attack, one could only rely on fortitude to resist. There was no doubt that Soren's fortitude was enough, so he actually reacted faster than the god of hunting and eliminated the effect of Greater Roar. Greater Haste. The power of the Lich Ring was activated, and a portal opened behind Soren. With a gust of wind, the figure of the Elder Wind Elemental appeared, followed by the Scorching Giant Fire Elemental. However, it seemed to be affected by Princess Royal's Frost Domain. The flames on its body became very dim as if it did not have much power. Shadow Leap. A strange silver-white streamer appeared in Soren's palm and finally turned into a silver curved sword. He held Pale Justice in one hand and Silver Sword of Gith in the other and rushed to the enemy in front of him. Perfect dual-wielding, omnipotent hands, legendary evasion, legendary combat skills, epic dexterity, and epic constitution. Proficient in reflex evasion, proficient in intuitive evasion, rolling evasion, and flexible movement. All along. Many of the abilities that Soren mastered were passive abilities, and it was these passive abilities that could support him to maintain a high level of performance in peak-level battles. Whirlwind Slash. Soren, who was blessed with greater haste, was quite amazing. It was completely beyond the range of the naked eye. With a gust of wind, his figure rushed in front of the god of hunting. Now it was time to compete. In this state of extreme explosive output, most of the active abilities had lost the opportunity to be used. Now it was time to see who could continuously burst out without any gaps. Dang dang dang. Fierce sparks suddenly appeared. Pale Justice and Silver Sword of Gith. Under the condition of mastering perfect dual-wielding, Soren's figure almost formed a strange silver-white curtain of light around him, making it impossible for others to even get close to him. Vaguely, a burst of chi shot out. No one knew if it was an illusion or not, but when Soren attacked at a speed beyond the limit of human beings, there were shallow sword marks on the ground around him. Chapter 649. The energy shot out. Accompanied by a strange silver-white stream of light, the divine shield on Mailer's body suddenly shattered like an eggshell. With Soren's terrifying attack speed, the opponent's divine shield was broken in the blink of an eye. In terms of attack speed, the god of the hunt could not be faster than Soren, who had mastered perfect dual-wielding. In terms of dodging ability, he could not have accumulated more dodging than Soren. His biggest advantage was that he was far thicker than Soren. A conservative estimate of the life force of this god was close to 800 points. If not for Pale Justice, Soren would not have been able to defeat him head-on. The reason was simple. Mailer's lethality was very high, and his terrifying strength was enough to make up for his lack of speed. If they had to fight to the end, then there was no doubt that the god of the hunt, Mailer, would win. But now that Soren had Pale Justice in his hands, the result was completely different. 5 slashes to break the shield. Pale Justice had terrifying attributes, plus 15 sharpness, plus 13 penetration, plus 15 toughness, plus 13 armor break, plus 15 holy damage. If these attributes could be described in one sentence, it would be as easy as cutting tofu to cut through the dragon scales on a dragon's body. Pale Justice was one of the sharpest weapons in the material plane because it was given a perfect blade when it was first made, and this was when it was not blessed with divine power. With the absolute advantage of the weapon, and with the faster attack speed, Mailer's attack speed was much faster. Soren's damage was almost double that of the god of the hunt, Mailer. Any attack was enough to exceed hundreds of points of damage. After the divine shield blocked about 600 points of damage, it finally exploded in the silver-white stream of light. God's Descent. A trace of panic appeared on the face of the god of the hunt, Mailer. At this moment he felt that death was approaching. So he did not hesitate to activate his last life-saving card, the special power brought by the ability of divinity, God's Descent. It greatly strengthened his saint form and temporarily restored a part of his power in the form of a god. Strengthened constitution. Strengthened strength. Strengthened resistance. Immune to spells. The body of the god of the hunt, Mailer, was wrapped in divine power. It looked as if he had returned to his original form. The form of a true god was pure energy, so it was not as restricted as the form of a saint. At this moment he was about 1/3 of the power of a deity, and the immunity effect brought by the power of the divinity allowed him to directly ignore the damage of cold, fire, acid, poison, lightning, and so on. At the same time, it greatly increased his resistance to physical damage. If other people encountered such a situation, they would be at a loss. Elemental damage was basically ineffective, and physical damage reduction was as high as 90%, equivalent to the damage reduction of a demigod lich. Any magical damage would not have any effect on him. In such a situation there was basically no way to fight. Clang clang clang. Soren's figure continuously retreated. He held the silver blade of Gith in one hand and Pale Justice in the other. He stared at the opponent in front of him. I must drag it out until the effect of the avatar ends. As a legendary rogue who had experienced the most turbulent period of the Avatar crisis, Soren knew very well that no one could kill a god directly when the Avatar was activated. Mailer was now close to the form of a god, and the form of a god was rarely killed by mortals in the long history. Although Soren was also a god, the avatar crisis left him with the most basic form of a saint. This gap could not be made up. Mailer was immune to most of the elemental attacks, and he also had up to 90% damage reduction in the form of a god. In a head-on confrontation, Soren would be the one who would be exhausted to death. At this point, even if he had Pale Justice, it would be useless. The damage reduction was too high. It could break the opponent's defense, but it could not seriously injure him. Only when the time of the avatar ended could Soren kill Mailer. This was something that he was very glad about. In the context of the avatar crisis, the power of all gods was greatly weakened. Even the powerful Queen of Spiders could only maintain the avatar crisis for a short time. The situation of the battle was reversed all of a sudden. Soren became a person who kept pulling away and stalling for time, while Mailer, the god of the hunt, chased after him like a madman. It seemed that if he was a little slower he might not be able to recover. The power of a god was very short. According to Soren's estimation, Mailer, the god of the hunt, could only maintain the avatar crisis for about 30 seconds at most. After 30 seconds, it would be time to decide the outcome. Shadow Hide. Shadow Leap. Rogues had a natural advantage in survival. If Soren did not want to face Mailer, the god of the hunt, head-on, he always had a way to get rid of him. Anxiety spread on the face of the god of the hunt. If Soren was a warrior he could kill Mailer in 3 seconds, but Soren was a rogue, a damn rogue with high agility, evasion and stealth. Time ticked by. No one dared to approach the avatar crisis, but as time went by, the scales of victory gradually tilted toward Soren. His divine power was burning. The divine power of Mailer was almost exhausted. Princess Royal was waiting for the opportunity outside the battlefield. As a powerful spellcaster, she was not afraid that the god of the hunt could kill her in seconds. This was the confidence of a peak mage. In a real top-level battle, the most powerful damage output would never be a mage, but no one could compare with a mage in terms of the most powerful field control. The main damage output was always the melee type. It was difficult for a pure elemental mage to survive into the realm of legends. At this moment, Soren even seemed to hear the ticking of time. When the god of the hunt, Mailer's divine form ended, he directly shuttled through the shadows and appeared beside him again. The avatar crisis was over. Now it was his turn to fight to his heart's content. Just as Soren rushed to the side of the god of the hunt, Mailer, Princess Royal also quickly approached the opponent. She completed the casting action at an amazing speed, and then a huge palm appeared on the head of the god of the hunt, Mailer. Bigby's Capture Palm. Level 7 spell, God-slaying spell. A trace of shock appeared in Soren's eyes, but he did not hesitate in his actions. In an instant he waved his sharp blade and swept over. The third move of Bigby's 5 consecutive palms. Although it wasn't the most powerful legendary spell, Bigby's Crushing Palm, Bigby's Grappling Palm, still had a huge advantage in controlling the enemy. These 5 combat wizard spells had always been known as the real God-slaying spell. In combat applications, their effects were much more powerful than the low-level Melf's Minute Meteors. The latter could only barely break through the defense, while the former could even control a god in the form of a saint. A huge energy palm caught the god of the hunt, Mailer, and temporarily restrained him in place. Bigby's Capture Palm, Level 7 spell. Bigby's Capture Palm can directly capture the opponent with a giant energy hand. Its capture bonus is your spellcaster level plus your intelligence adjustment, Mage, Wisdom adjustment, Priest, or Charm adjustment, Warlock. The basic strength of this giant energy hand is 35 points, and the upper limit of the capture bonus is 12 points. The captured enemy must be judged by strength to determine whether they can break free. If the difference in strength is too great, the enemy will be directly crushed. God-slaying spell. As a 7-circle spell that wasn't very advanced, Bigby's Grappling Palm could summon a giant energy hand with a base strength of 35 points to grab the opponent. According to the Warlock standard, after 10 points of charm, every 2 points of charm would add an additional 1 point of grappling strength. Soren was not very clear about Princess Royal's charm attribute, but it was definitely above 30 points. Then according to 30 points, the value of this spell was as high as 45 points of strength. 45 points of strength. There were probably not many people in the entire material plane who could achieve this, right? It could be said that an enemy with a weaker strength would be directly crushed by it, and even if their strength was high enough, they would certainly be trapped for a period of time. This was how the god-slaying spell got its name. To deal with this kind of spell, it was basically impossible to resist it. One could only rely on various methods to avoid it, or the ability to resist evocation and force field spells. Bigby's 5 consecutive palms were all energy force field spells. No! A desperate roar sounded. The god of the hunt, Mailer, was extremely frightened to find that he could not break free from the control of Bigby's capture palm. Strength over 45 points. If only Princess Royal was present, he had enough confidence to rely on his powerful immunity and elemental resistance to resist the spell until it failed. But if Soren was added, then the possibility of him surviving was infinitely close to zero. A gust of wind blew. Soren's whole person turned into a shadow all over the sky, and the ability of perfect dual wielding was fully displayed in an instant. His sword attacks fell on the body of the god of the hunt, leaving countless scars on his opponent's body in an instant. Sword form, beheading. Spinning slash. With blood gushing out, the head of the god of the hunt, Mailer, flew in the cold light of the sword, and then his huge body fell to the ground. At the last moment before death, he slowly said a sentence. The hunter has finally become the prey. A wave of divine power gushed out. The divine power visible to the naked eye turned into a golden light and exploded. Unlike any target that Soren had killed in the past, the power of the god of the hunt, Mailer, did not all pour into his body. Shards of divinity. The power of a true god would explode when they died, and the divinity they possessed would directly form shards of divinity. Only the power that was suitable for Soren could be absorbed by him. For example, the ability of evil, hunting, tracking, and so on. If it was the power of the Chaos realm, then it would be scattered directly on the battlefield, and the realm of Chaos would also condense a corresponding shard of divinity. This power was not something that Soren could absorb. If he did, it would have a huge impact on him. The sky was full of golden light. A considerable part of the divine power poured into Soren's body, while a small part poured into Princess Royal's body. This kind of explosion of divinity was full of randomness. Even some non-legendary level figures on the battlefield had integrated 1 point of divinity from the god of hunting due to some unknown compatibility. This divinity might not be able to increase his strength, but it was very likely to change his fate. The power was divided into 3 parts. The largest portion poured into Soren's body because there were too many abilities that were compatible with him. Hunting, tracking, evil, power, and so on. Princess Royal only absorbed a small part of the divine power. She selectively integrated part of it, and the rest was directly abandoned by her. If it was not compatible, more divinity was not necessarily better. A faint silver-white light. From the corpse of the god of the hunt, Mailer, another large part of the divine power emerged. This power was not absorbed by Soren, but flew to the edge of the battlefield. The divinity of the war creature. The moon realm. A large part of the divinity and realm power of the god of the hunt, Mailer, disappeared and integrated into a clone that suddenly appeared on the edge of the battlefield. The Lady of the Silver Moon. Soren turned his head, and his expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied. He looked at the clone of the god that was covered in silver-white light outside the battlefield. The other party took a part of his spoils. Even if this part of the spoils was not compatible with him, the behavior of not taking it for oneself still made him unhappy. Chapter 650. Racial conflict. The clergy of any race had huge restrictions. For example, Soren's half-elf clergy could only be absorbed because he was a half-elf. The clergy of the war creature was almost completely opposite to his. Even if Soren killed the god of the hunt, Mailer, it was still easily taken away by the incarnation of the Silver Moon Lady. She also had the clergy of the war creature, and her compatibility with it should be the highest among all the gods. The Silver Moon Lady, Soren. Soren looked at her silently. His expression was very dignified, and there seemed to be a trace of hostility. Facing Soren's hostility, the Silver Moon Lady's expression was also very cautious. However, after all, she did not come in her true form. Instead, a god's incarnation appeared here and took away the divinity, so the conflict was not fierce to the extent that the two sides directly attacked each other. For a god, an incarnation was only a part of their power. Even if the incarnation was killed, it was not enough to seriously injure a god. The consequences of starting a war would be very heavy for both sides. After all, the background of the Avatar crisis was here, and there were too many people who were covetously eyeing them. Chaotic good, Soren. Lawful evil, Soren. From the perspective of camp, the two were simply standing on opposite sides. However, Soren had always been a very restrained person, so he silently looked at the Silver Moon Lady in front of him and slowly said, "Your Excellency, Silver Moon Lady, today you seem to owe me a big favor." The Silver Moon Lady was silent. After a moment she nodded slightly and then gently bowed, acknowledging Soren's words. The silver light dissipated. After taking away the clergy of the war creature and the moon domain, the Silver Moon Lady's figure disappeared. She admitted that she owed Soren a big favor. Although they were on opposite sides, from the perspective of a god, the two sides at most did not see eye to eye with each other. It was not to the extent of fighting. The Silver Moon Lady had a bigger plan. And Soren was not willing to easily start a war with such a goddess. You did the right thing by not being impulsive. Accompanied by a faint fragrance, Princess Royal's figure appeared beside Soren. The temperature around her body was very low, and Soren even suspected that she didn't have the body temperature of a normal person. It was obvious that she had lost control of her strength, and he could feel it during the battle. Princess Royal watched the incarnation of the Lady of Silver Moon disappear and said slowly, "Soren is one of the oldest gods. She was born before the material plane. No matter how weak she is now, not fighting with her is the best decision." Silver Moon Lady Soren. She was once one of the gods closest to the greater divine power. In her battle with the Lady of the Night, the terrible energy storm formed the first great god, the Lord of Storms. The battle between the two goddesses did not stop. In their second round of confrontation, the material plane gave birth to a natural will, Mother Earth. The battle finally reached its climax. In their new round of battle, the uncontrollable energy caused the strength of the two goddesses to be greatly reduced, and as a result, a third great divine power was born, the goddess of magic. To be honest, if possible, Soren absolutely did not want to fight with the Lady of Silver Moon, because she could really teach him a lesson in minutes. Of course, the premise was that she could recover her original strength. The battle was finally over. Killing gods didn't give you much loot because although they had lost their connection with the divine kingdom, they had their own independent space. It was difficult for outsiders to find and open this kind of extra-dimensional space, so you couldn't find much loot on the corpses of gods. The only thing left by the god of the hunt, Malor, was the +3 artifact, the Claw of the Beast. This artifact still had some of the power of the god of the hunt, so it could be absorbed or used to make a new artifact. He did not touch the things of the legends. The legends who came here basically had strong backgrounds, so there was no need to provoke enemies for no reason. Besides, Soren already had enough enemies. But, in the end he still took Pale Justice away. There was no reason. This most powerful artifact in the material plane could not be left here. Even if Soren could not possess it, he still had to take it away. After killing the god of the hunt, Malor, a row of crazy data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Target killed. You killed the god of the hunt, Malor? Target's soul energy has been extracted. You received 3750000 slaughter EXP. Warning. Warning. Unknown energy interference. Part of soul energy cannot be absorbed. Part of divinity and divine kingdom has been extracted by an unknown target. Part of target's soul energy has been extracted by an unknown target. You received 2850000 slaughter EXP. The souls of the gods were very powerful. It was mentioned before that if a mortal was lucky enough to kill a god, then it was possible to directly advance into the realm of legends. The slaughter EXP brought by the god of the hunt, Malor, was almost comparable to all the slaughter EXP Soren had accumulated in the past. Below was the second row of data. Target killed. You successfully killed the god of the hunt, Malor. Target is in the form of a saint. Target's divinity has been extracted. You received 23 divinity points. Part of divinity has been lost. Target has divinity. Target's divinity has been absorbed. Target's divinity has been extracted. You received 25 divinity points. Part of divinity has been lost. A part of the divinity had been absorbed by the Princess Royal. The Silver Moon Lady took the biggest part, A. Beastman, Divine Kingdom, and A. Moon Domain, which represented a corresponding part of the divinity and divinity. Soren's loss of divinity and divinity was probably close to 20 points. That was why he said that the Silver Moon Lady owed him a big favor, and the Silver Moon Lady also nodded and admitted it. But this was just the beginning. There was a lot of data behind, mainly the divine kingdom and domain of the god of the hunt, Malor. You successfully killed a god. You successfully killed the lesser divine god of the hunt, Malor. Your God Slayer background ability has been upgraded. Your existence has affected the structure of the gods. God Slayer, Soren, legendary background ability. The moment you successfully killed a god again, your existence has deeply attracted the attention of many powerful beings in the multiverse. Whether it is the gods of the heavens, the demons of the abyss, the devils of hell, or the evil gods in the dark corners, they have all begun to shift part of their attention to you. This is a display of power and also a special challenge. Some of the gods will see you as an enemy, and some will see you as a potential ally, but there are more gods who are silently watching you. But no matter what, your existence has been recognized by the gods, and you stand at the same height as them. Legend plus 100, Intimidation plus 200, Negotiation plus 100. All of your tests of immunity will have an additional 2 points of Godslayer value. Remark: the current legend has reached the limit of the material plane. Then there were other data notifications. Target killed. Target has the Beastman, Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdom extraction failed. You cannot absorb any power of this Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdom power transfer. Target has the Hunting Divine Kingdom. Hunting Divine Kingdom extraction successful. You have obtained part of the information of the Hunting Divine Kingdom. Divine power conversion. Hunting Divine Kingdom can be mastered, or it can be transformed into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. Transforming into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom will lose most of the power of the Hunting Divine Kingdom. You already have the information of the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdom conversion will directly master the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. It was a difficult choice. Soren had to make a choice: to inherit the Hunting Divine Kingdom, or to rely on his own Son of Slaughter ability to transform it into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. In terms of power increase, there was no doubt that the Hunting Divine Kingdom was greater. But in terms of growth potential, the Slaughter Divine Kingdom could finally enter the ranks of the Greater Divine Kingdom. If he had the Slaughter Divine Kingdom, Soren would have the possibility to directly master the Slaughter Divine Kingdom in the future. There was a limit to the power increase of a god. For example, the vampire deity, Reinhardt, he first dabbled in the Hunting Divine Kingdom and tried to master the Hunting Divine Kingdom. In the end, he died in the hands of Soren. So Soren also had a part of the Hunting Divine Kingdom's power, but he transformed it into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom's information. Hunting and slaughter. Although it looked similar, in fact the difference between the two was quite huge. The Hunting Divine Kingdom only gave birth to Malor, but the Slaughter Divine Kingdom gave birth to too many powerful gods. Soren had to make a choice. If he chose the Hunting Divine Kingdom, it would take a lot of effort to transform it in the future. It was clear just by looking at Malor, who was still the god of hunting after so long. If he chose the Slaughter Divine Kingdom, it was equivalent to giving up a part of the Hunting Divine Kingdom's power and directly merging it with the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. There was no need to engage in some superficial hunting. Instead, it was the most basic form of killing power. If he chose this, it would be very easy for Soren to master the Slaughter Divine Kingdom in the future. It was even possible for him to condense the Slaughter Divine Kingdom without killing other gods. Note: extending from a divine kingdom to a divine kingdom requires time, events, and opportunities. At this time, he had to make a choice. Chapter 651. Convert, Slaughter, Domain. In the end, Soren chose the Slaughter Domain with more potential. The Hunting Domain was a bit useless to him because his followers did not rely on hunting for a living. Even if it was related to killing, Soren was mostly involved in war. There were a lot of wars in Mordor, so it was not likely to be hunting. The god of the hunt, Malor, was able to use the Hunting Domain very well because he mastered the Beastfolk Domain. This was an extension of the survival characteristics of the race, but it was almost difficult for Soren to use the full power of the domain. A row of data appeared in front of him. Conversion successful. Extracting the core power of Hunting Domain. You have mastered a new domain ability, Slaughter. Note: followers and priests can access the Slaughter Domain. You have lost part of the power of Hunting Domain. Slaughter Domain. It was one of the most powerful domain abilities in the evil faction. If it could be combined with the destruction domain, then it could create a greater divine power, God. Unfortunately, Soren was not very interested in destruction. Then there were other domain information. Target has the tracking domain. Tracking domain has been successfully extracted. You have acquired part of the information of the tracking domain. Divine power conversion. You have mastered a new domain, tracking. Passive effect. Listen plus 150, search plus 200, detect plus 200, survival plus 200. Followers and priests can access the tracking domain. Target has the beast domain. The extraction of the divine domain failed. You cannot absorb any power of this domain. Domain power transfer. Beast domain. It occupied a small part of the power of the god of the hunt, Mailer. It was the golden light that exploded after killing him. Soren could not absorb the power of this domain, nor could the Princess Royal. Even the Lady of Silvermoon could not absorb it. The power of the domain was broken into many parts, including a small amount of divinity and divinity, which were scattered on the battlefield. Some of them even flew to an unknown location. This kind of situation also happened in the Avatar Crisis. The luckiest guy even picked up a shard of godhood in the wild. However, these were all very fragmented powers. The beast divinity was of no use to Soren. Instead, it could cause his original power system to become chaotic. Mailer was a beast with high intelligence, and this divinity could cause his body to collapse. Changes formed to become half human, half beast. The target has the animal domain. Animal domain extraction failed. You are unable to absorb any energy from this domain. Divine power transfer. The second ability that couldn't be absorbed. Soren basically did not have much connection with animals unless he was a droll. The divinity scattered among the ordinary people on the battlefield should be the ability of the animal domain, because the lucky one was a wild droll. The target has the chaos domain. The extraction of the chaos domain failed. You are unable to absorb any energy from this domain. Divine power transfer. The third ability that couldn't be absorbed. Soren's alignment was very firm, so the chaos domain was quite repulsive to him. The target has the evil domain. Evil domain extraction successful. You have obtained part of the information of the evil domain. Divine power transfer. Ability upgrade. You have mastered a new domain, evil. Note, believers and priests can access the evil domain. Ability fusion. You have mastered a new ability, evil aura. He finally mastered an aura ability. Although Soren had the divinity of fear, he had not reached the level of fear aura. Perhaps he would have to wait until he mastered the relevant domain. Currently, evil aura was the first aura ability he mastered. It was a passive domain that could be activated at any time. The target has the moon domain. Moon domain extraction failed. You are unable to absorb any energy from this domain. Divine power transfer. The fourth ability that couldn't be absorbed. This power was taken away by the Lady of Silvermoon. The moon was her core power. The target has the strength domain. Strength extraction successful. You have obtained part of the information of the strength domain. Divine power transfer. Ability upgrade. Your basic strength has permanently increased by 2 points. Note, your ability is not enough to directly master the strength domain. He did not directly master the strength domain. Soren was not surprised because the god of the hunt, Mailer, had only dabbled in the strength domain. He did not directly master the core power of this domain. The core of strength was in the hands of the orc gods. Mailer had only dabbled in this domain. Divinity, priesthood, and divine domain were all integrated. Soren's harvest was naturally the biggest, but because he clashed with the god of the hunt, he could not really absorb much power. A chaotic evil. A lawful evil. The core power of the god of the hunt, Mailer, was partly in chaos and partly in war creatures. These two forces were quite repulsive to Soren, and in the end he could only benefit the Lady of Silvermoon. The other party was chaotic good. Conservatively speaking, the Lady of Silvermoon combined the three forces of chaos, war creatures, and the moon. The power of divinity was absorbed. However, the real transformation still took some time. Soren had to erase the residual consciousness of Mailer in the divinity. After any god died, there would be something left. He had to make sure that the other party was completely dead. However, there was still the most important thing to do now. After Soren left the battlefield, he immediately began to mobilize his own power of law and temporarily entered a higher state than the saint form. Divine Fragment Extraction. Soren began to extract the divine fragment he had just absorbed. With the distortion of the surrounding space, a crystal-clear fragment of divine fragment appeared in his palm. It was now the time of the Avatar crisis. The gods could not give others power at will. In normal times, Soren could directly use his power to promote a weak god, although the price was high. But now he could only use this method to extract divine fragment. This fragment of divine fragment was prepared for Vivian. In terms of divine power, Vivian had absorbed so many Sons of Fear that she was basically not much lower than Soren. However, if it was the power of divine fragment, she was afraid that she basically did not have it at present. Soren directly condensed 10 points of divine fragment. In this way, as long as Vivian absorbed its power, it would be enough to reach the standard of godhood, and he himself just had 30 points of divine fragment. He could prepare to upgrade to lesser divine power. It was not easy to upgrade the power of a god, especially during the time of troubles. Soren had to replenish his divine power to permanently increase the upper limit of divine power. Under normal circumstances, the power of the gods was directly connected to the divine kingdom. When they needed to upgrade, they could directly extract the power of the divine kingdom. But now all the gods had lost their connection with the divine kingdom and could only rely on themselves to slowly accumulate power. The foundation of the god of the hunt, Malor, was still very rich. After all, he was an old god who had existed for a long time. According to Soren's estimation, the total divinity of the other party should be about 60 points, and the total value of divine fragment should be about 50 points. It did not reach the standard of intermediate divine power, but it was still much stronger than other, lesser divine power gods. There were too many conflicting factions between the two sides. Otherwise, the god of the hunt, Malor, would probably be able to provide Soren with more divinity and divine fragment. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.